A castle stands under a stormy sky. Lightning strikes above, wind moves the leaves. The Duke Posey stands alone in the room, his gaze fixed on the window. Lightning illuminates his figure. Posey turns his head toward the sound of approaching footsteps, his eyes narrowing. A small pair of feet approaches Posey, stepping across the floor toward him. Aisha announces that she heard Posey called for her. Posey responds that he heard Aisha is the most outstanding among the current batch of trainees. He will assign her first mission, but first she will need a name. Starting today, her name will be Aisha. Posey asks Aisha for her answer regarding the name he assigned her. Aisha responds affirmatively, accepting the name Posey assigned her. Posey begins explaining Aisha's mission, instructing her to infiltrate as the lost daughter of Duke Crost of the Prozon Kingdom. Because Aisha is only 5 years old, no one would suspect her of being a spy. She must do if her background is close to being discovered, emphasizing that she must act for the Doktia Kingdom and His Grace Duke Poza. Aisha declares that she will eliminate her own existence if her cover is ever at risk. Posey expresses approval, noting that Duke Crost is highly suspicious, but Aisha should be able to deceive him easily as the best-trained spy, and make absolutely sure she becomes the apple of Duke Crost's eye. He will look forward to hearing good news from Aisha about the mission. After Posey finishes assigning the mission, Aisha leaves the room. Aisha sweats profusely as she contemplates the mission. Aisha clenches her fist and reflects that it has been 5 years since she was raised as the hunting dog of the Poza dukedom. Along with her first mission, she was given the name Aisha. Aisha, she is destined to be killed sooner or later, and that it will happen gruesomely. It looks like she will be executed for pretending to be a daughter. She transmigrated into a growth-type fantasy novel called The Sword of Judgment. The story she transmigrated into involves Duke Poze with his poison ability and Duke Crost with his ice ability. The story is set in a world where Duke Poze and Duke Crost's villainous families oppose each other. The protagonist, an illegitimate child of the Poze dukedom who endured persecution, overcomes trials and defeats the villains of both families, ultimately uniting the two kingdoms in a story full of cliché. However, in this novel, her situation is different, and she wonders how things ended up like this. She ended up being raised as a spy for the Poze dukedom. From fragmented clues like Poze and spy, she knew she had possessed someone in the Sword of Judgment, but she is reflecting further on the situation. Since the trainees weren't even given names, she couldn't figure out who she possessed, realizing that the life of a spy was harsh. If her life as a spy was going to be this painful, she would rather have been a maid or a commoner, or even a street beggar who at least had freedom. She was suddenly called to the Duke's office. The moment she learned the name given to her along with her first mission, she had possessed someone destined to die. Aisha reflects that, looking back, she would miss her hellish trainee days, because at least then it wasn't obvious that she was going to die. She is surprised at how calm she feels in the situation and wonders if it is because of the spy training she received. Being raised as a spy is unfair enough, but it is worse to be an extra who dies even before the protagonist appears, and she also thinks about Duke Crost. Duke Crost is a cold-blooded man, without blood or tears, a massive wall possessing all sorts of titles, and the main villain of the novel. Duke Crost became even more vicious after his entire family went missing during the war with the monsters. After the war ended, Duke Crost wandered like a madman looking for his lost children and wife, but never found them. Duke Crost's guilt for failing to protect his family became his reverse scale. Duke Crost ultimately secluded himself in his castle, becoming a dog that only protects his family, wearing a black mask everywhere, and extremely avoiding meeting people. She has to become the fake daughter of such a person. Although she has lived there for 5 years, her luggage is sparse, containing only shabby clothes and emergency poisons. The only thing she received from the Posey family is poison. Whether in her past life or her current life, her situation has been the same. She is once again in a position where she is left empty-handed in someone else's care. Quickly, Aisha boards the carriage and departs. Sitting in the carriage, Aisha looks out the window and reflects that becoming a wanderer again brings back memories of her past life, when she lost her parents at a young age, was a loner with nowhere to lean on. And perhaps that's why she just believed the words of worthless adults. In her past life, someone told Aisha that overtime is normal, everyone else endures it, and she just has to endure it too. That's just how life is. In her past life, she pushed herself too hard, lived by constantly whipping herself, and ultimately died absurdly from overwork. The problem is that in this life too she is about to die just by following others' words. When they arrive, the carriage comes to a stop. As Aisha steps down from the carriage, she reflects that she thought this life would be different, even though she realizes she hadn't transmigrated into a healing childcare genre. Even when she ultimately became a spy, she didn't let go of her string of hope. She believed once she became an adult, she could somehow regain her freedom. Aisha reflects that it's too early to give up. A death filled with regret is enough for one lifetime. A foolish life is the same, and that she now has 3 options left in this situation. Her first option is to act as the fake daughter like in the original work, but clumsy acting could easily lead to death, so she rejects it. Her second option is to reveal that she is a spy, which would result in dying before even meeting Duke Crossed. As Aisha approaches the knights, she calls out to them, and the knights respond, asking what the matter is. Aisha asks the knights if they could guide her to the Duke, then reflects that fortunately she knows the contents of this novel well. Aisha smiles hesitantly and begins to speak, saying Aisha places her hand on her chest and confidently declares that she knows where the missing princess is. Her third choice is to betray Duke Paz and stick with Crossed. Hearing this, the 2 knights look at each other with confusion. One knight asks if Aisha thinks meeting the Duke is that easy. The other adds that they don't let lies like that slide, even from a child, and Aisha reflects that it's not going to be easy to see him. Aisha responds that she has heard that the direct descendants of the Crossed family. Aisha asks the knights if it's true that the direct descendants of the Crossed family must undergo a trial the moment they're born, being placed in an ice cave to endure the harsh cold. Aisha explains that the Lady of Cross told her this herself. Her mother taught her while they were sitting in a room with a warm fireplace, and then she reflects that this is just information she knows from reading the original novel. It seems to be working perfectly. If an outsider knows such highly classified information, they'll inevitably assume she must be connected to the lady of the house in some way. Some people, seeing Aisha being led inside, whisper among themselves in surprise, noting that someone claiming to know the whereabouts of the lady has appeared. The servants whisper among themselves, noting that it seems to be that child. She looks so young, and they wonder how she could possibly know. The knight tells Aisha to make sure she follows him closely. Aisha exhales deeply and reflects that the real challenge begins now, and she has to stay focused. First, she'll use her knowledge of the original plot to help Duke Crossed find his lost daughter, and in exchange, she just needs to live under the protection and support of the Crossed family. Even if her true identity is exposed later on, as long as she has found Duke Crossed's daughter, there should be room for negotiation. Now that she has successfully infiltrated the duchy, she has taken the first crucial step, and her next objective is negotiating with the Duke himself. Dorothy stands in front of the knight and asks who the child is. The knight tells Dorothy that the child claims to know the whereabouts of the lady, and asks her to watch over Aisha while he reports to his grace, and Aisha reflects on what she should demand from the Duke to ensure she survives safely. Dorothy agrees to the knight's request, saying she will look after Aisha for a moment. As Aisha looks up, she feels an overwhelming aura radiating from Dorothy. Aisha recalls that with her red hair and green eyes, that person could have been Dorothy. Since she infiltrated the duchy, it was obvious she'd cross paths with Dorothy, but her head was so full of survival plans that she completely forgot. While Dorothy observes her and thinks it's quite strange, Aisha was specifically ordered to infiltrate disguised as the Lady of Crossed. Dorothy asks why the story changed, while Aisha reflects that the spy from the Pose Duchy had infiltrated here before her. He first and only person to successfully infiltrate the Crossed Duchy. Her role in the story was small, but she was a ruthless villain with no qualms about committing atrocities and was terrifying even in the original novel. Dorothy says that she knew Aisha was suspicious. Dorothy asks Aisha if they shall take their time and dig into this. Aisha worries to herself, thinking that this makes no sense. She finally found a clue to survival, and now it's going to end pointlessly. Dorothy threatens that if Aisha doesn't answer, she will take action immediately. Aisha forcefully pushes Dorothy away. After pushing Dorothy away, Aisha quickly runs off. As she runs, Aisha thinks to herself that she needs to run first and buy some time to figure something out. She needs a plan to break through this situation. After running for a distance, Aisha notices someone standing nearby. Aisha yells out loudly, calling to the person she sees nearby. Aisha begins to call for help, but before she can finish, she trips over a stone. Aisha tumbles forward uncontrollably, falling straight toward the man. Calypso looks at Aisha and asks what she is and how she got in. At this moment, Dorothy's voice rings out, shouting at Aisha, calling her a little brat. Aisha worries to herself, thinking that she doesn't have time to explain anything, and resolves that whatever happens, happens. Aisha decided to hide in his cloak and said, "Mister, excuse me for a second." Aisha apologizes and explains that she's being chased by a scary person, asking if she can hide there for a moment. Calypso looks up and asks Aisha, repeating in surprise, "A scary person." At this moment, Dorothy has also arrived at the scene. Dorothy asks aloud, wondering where Aisha has gone. Seeing Dorothy approaching, Aisha, who is hiding under the cloak, worries to herself that she's coming this way. Dorothy says that she apologizes for entering without permission. By any chance he saw a little girl around 5 years old. Calypso asks Dorothy what the matter is, and Dorothy explains that the little girl is a bit suspicious for showing up out of the blue and claims to know where the lost lady is. Hearing this, Calypso asks again in curiosity the lost lady. The atmosphere grew heavy when that woman was mentioned. Just as expected from Crost's famously loyal inner circle, perhaps he is sensitive when it comes to loved ones who have passed away. Dorothy replied to Calypso. She was looking for Aisha and asked if Calypso had seen her. Inside, Aisha was anxious. She feared that Calypso would hand her over to Dorothy. If Aisha were caught red-handed like this, the outcome would be obvious to anyone. Contrary to Aisha's worries, Calypso simply stayed silent for a moment, not saying anything for the time being. After thinking it over, Calypso said that he hadn't seen any child. Perhaps Dorothy should look somewhere else. Hearing that, Aisha was a little surprised. Her eyes widened. With no other choice, Dorothy bowed her head and said goodbye to Calypso. After Dorothy left, Calypso told Aisha that she was safe now and could come out. Aisha slowly peeked out and thanked Calypso. Aisha stepped outside and let out a sigh of relief. Calypso then asked her if she really knew where that lady was. Calypso warned that if this was a joke, Aisha had gone too far. He demanded that she tell him the truth. Aisha replied that she had actually been in the same orphanage as that lady. However, she did not understand why she was the only one who managed to escape. Calypso immediately asked where that orphanage was. First, Aisha sincerely thanked Calypso for helping her. However, Aisha only told the Duke the location of the orphanage. If the wrong people found out that Aisha had revealed the lady's location, they would try to harm her. But Aisha had been born and raised in an orphanage. She had no family, no friends, and nothing at all. Aisha would ask the Duke to assign someone to protect her, a trustworthy supporter who could keep her safe. Calypso slowly stood up. He fully understood Aisha's meaning. Seeing him leave, Aisha immediately asked where he was going. Calypso slowly lowered his hood. Then he asked Aisha to follow him, saying he would take her to meet the Duke. A moment later, as she followed Calypso, Aisha thought to herself that she had struggled a lot to get through everything. But in the end, she had finally made it here. Aisha felt that she was very lucky to have met someone as kind as him, considering that he trusted her, a child he had only just met. He must be a very upright and honorable person. However, Aisha was getting tired trying to keep up with an adult in this body. She thought she should start a conversation to slow their pace down. Aisha, with tired eyes, called out to Calypso. She asked whether Calypso had any children. Aisha realized that her question might be a bit impolite, but she also thought that Calypso seemed very good at taking care of children. Calypso said nothing and gently patted Aisha's head instead. Calypso instructed Aisha not to be afraid when meeting the Duke, and to tell him exactly what she knew. He is the kind of person who is willing to fulfill any request from Aisha. Duke Calypso Crossed is portrayed in the original story as an extremely terrifying figure, and serves as the main antagonist of the Sword of Judgment. However, he was not always a villain. Before losing his family, he was once revered as a hero who protected humanity from monsters. Aisha thought she could persuade him, however, Aisha could not help but feel anxious. The anxiety was clearly visible on Aisha's face. But regardless, Aisha was being pushed into a difficult situation. At that moment, Nox opened the door, stepped out, and asked who she was. Aisha replied that she had come to see the Duke. She had no other choice. She had to try by any means necessary. Aisha asked Nox to tell the Duke that there was a child who knew the whereabouts of the young lady and was here. Nox refused and said that the Duke was away. Suddenly, the Duke's voice came from inside and ordered Aisha to be let in. Nox then turned back inside and said, "How could anyone know where the young lady was? Everyone had already struggled to search for her on his behalf." Aisha became even more anxious. Her face darkened as she was about to face the Duke. The Duke said that he would know the details once he went inside. Duke Crossed, with his large appearance, looking as if he was at least 190 centimeters tall. His face was hidden behind a black cloth so Aisha could not see his facial features, let alone his expression. The Duke's presence truly overwhelmed Aisha. The Grand Duke asked Aisha if she knew where the Grand Duke's daughter was, and the Duke wanted to know where his daughter was right now. Aisha was very anxious. She tried to calm herself. She had practiced this situation countless times. First, Aisha wanted to ask the Duke one thing. If Aisha told the Duke where his daughter was, Aisha wanted to know if the Duke would be willing to help Aisha with something. The Duke immediately agreed and made an oath. But Aisha rejected it. She didn't need an oath. She wanted a legally binding contract instead. The Duke sarcastically said that Aisha did not trust the oath of a Duke. Aisha was startled when she heard that. Her eyes widened in panic. She was very frightened, but she could not show it on the outside. Aisha was an orphan with no one to protect her. From Aisha's point of view, the only thing she could trust was not empty words from someone, but a legally binding contract. For someone like Aisha, raised as a spy from birth, even if something happened to her, no one would know or care. Therefore, words that could change depending on the situation were useless to Aisha. However, she would not make unreasonable demands. She knew her place. Therefore, Aisha wanted to negotiate with the Duke. As soon as she finished speaking, the Duke agreed to her request, leaving her extremely surprised. But in return, the Duke would also set a condition. If the Duke's daughter was not at the location Aisha provided, Aisha would have to pay the price for her deception. Without hesitation, Aisha immediately nodded and agreed to his demand. And now the Duke wanted to know Aisha's current situation. Aisha wanted the Duke to find a legal guardian for her, because without one, no one would protect her until she came of age. That was Aisha's only condition. The Duke fell silent for a moment, then spoke up and asked if anyone was outside. Nox immediately appeared, and the Duke then assigned him the task of drafting the contract. Aisha heard that, and joy was clearly visible on her face. In Aisha's heart, she almost wanted to say that her plan had succeeded. Nox was a little confused and asked again if that was true. A contract like that was too harsh for a child who was only 5 years old, but the Duke reassured that he had no intention of harming the young child. The Duke just wanted to see her reaction. But when the Duke said he just wanted to see her reaction, did that mean he already believed her? Duke Calypso asked Nox if it was an orphanage near the Andra swamp. Nox confirmed that it was true, but the problem was that it was located inside the duchy, and moreover, Calypso had just made an unreasonable request through the communication orb. If he wanted to set foot in the duchy, Calypso was only allowed to visit alone, with no night escort, and he was only permitted to bring a maximum of 2 people with him, and in exchange for that, he would have to hand over the criminal plains to the kingdom of Doktia. The territory was one thing, but traveling alone was far too dangerous, especially when Doktia had been pushing them with actions that were almost provocative. Moreover, Calypso could not openly request to visit enemy territory. At the very least, he would have to sneak in secretly. Despite Nox's objections, Calyps did not change his mind. That's the fastest way to get into the Paz Duchy. Calyps did not care whether it was the Pozzi Duchy or a battlefield. As long as he could find his daughter, he would do it. Calyps ordered Knox to inform the Duke of Pozzi that he would be visiting in 1 week. Knox could only sigh. He was already too used to Calyps losing his rationality whenever there was news related to his family. Knox did not want to admit it, but apart from him, everyone else had already given up. The Duke's family, those who had been lost in the war, may have been gone forever. To Knox, Aisha also seemed suspicious. Of all places. Why was Aisha in the Pozzi Duchy? There was only one possibility. Knox would need to learn more about her. Not long after, the servant saw Aisha and began gossiping that she knew the whereabouts of the young lady, and that the Duke had now gone mad, saying he would go to the kingdom of Daksha without a single guard. They believed that if he went there like that, the Duke would never be able to return safely. Aisha did not expect that the rumors had already spread as far as the servants. She began to worry about someone. Suddenly, Dorothy appeared from behind, startling Aisha. Dorothy thought that Aisha had pulled off quite a bold move. Dorothy did not expect that Aisha had managed to lure Duke Crost into the Paz Duchy, and even Aisha had thought Duke Crost would either infiltrate secretly or lead an army. She had never imagined that he would openly request an audience with the Duke of Paz like that. Aisha could not believe that his heart had become so desperate because of his daughter. Dorothy thought that Aisha had completed the task in a single moment, something even Dorothy could not achieve in 6 years. She praised Aisha as a truly excellent spy, and she also thanked Aisha. Because of Aisha, Dorothy had become useless to the Duke of Paz. It is precisely because of that Dorothy may soon be eliminated by him. Aisha is worried. Every situation is going off course from her intentions. Duke Crost is visiting the Paz Duchy alone, and Duke Paz, who never misses a chance to eliminate a rival, will deal with him discreetly and leave no trace. Of course, because this happens within the Paz Duchy, he cannot completely avoid suspicion, but even if he has to bear the stain of being the one who killed a hero, he will not miss this opportunity. And the spy who infiltrated the Crost family, who is now no longer useful and will instead become a burden and be eliminated, not only Dorothy, but also Aisha. Dorothy says that anyway she will be eliminated, so she thinks that taking a friend with her to the other world to vent her resentment is not a bad thing. Aisha tries to persuade her. Aisha says she has an idea. Aisha tries to calm herself and find a way to solve it. First, the prerequisite for Aisha's survival is that Duke Crost must survive, and Dorothy does not know about the contract between the Duke and Aisha. In other words, Dorothy cannot be certain about Aisha's betrayal, no matter what the purpose is. The result has already given Duke Paz a golden opportunity. In this situation, the only way for Duke Crost and Aisha to live is to inform Duke Crost that Dorothy is a spy of Paz. When Dorothy is discovered to be a spy, Duke Crost will have a legitimate reason to bring guards. And when Dorothy is eliminated, the threat to Aisha will also decrease. To carry out this plan, Aisha must first deceive Dorothy. Aisha places her hand on her chest and says that she is in the same situation as Dorothy. Aisha skillfully mixes truth and lies. Aisha tries to calm Dorothy down and get her to think rationally. If Duke Paz wants to eliminate Dorothy in order to avoid leaving any unresolved issues, then of course Aisha will also be eliminated. Therefore, they are not enemies, they are comrades in the same boat, Dorothy shouts and says that it is ridiculous. Because Dorothy seems suspicious, Aisha will be honest with her. Pretending to be Crost's daughter is too risky. Therefore, instead of posing as the Duke's lost daughter, Aisha decides to act as a child who knows her whereabouts. So the plan changes. She prepares fake evidence that the girl is at an orphanage in the Paz Duchy, even if she does not exist. As long as there is evidence, Aisha will gain the Duke's trust and keep his hope alive, but she did not expect him to act so suddenly. However, they also have a way to survive. Duke Paz is very ruthless, but he is someone who will reward certain results. Before Duke Crost visits the Paz Duchy, they must eliminate him first. If he dies here, Duke Paz will be able to cover it up more easily, so he won't need to do that. Dorothy immediately stops Aisha from speaking any further. Dorothy grabs Aisha's hand and tells Aisha to follow her. Dorothy angrily asks why Aisha didn't report that Aisha would assassinate Duke Crossed. This is why Dorothy strongly opposed when they said they would send a 5-year-old child. Aisha thinks that since Dorothy is speaking so recklessly, she must be very worried. Aisha says that she will lure Duke Crossed outside. Aisha realizes that when people are anxious, their judgment becomes clouded. As Dorothy said, Aisha is only 5 years old, so the Duke will not suspect that Aisha has any scheme. When Aisha requests a private meeting with the Duke and successfully lures him, Dorothy will take care of dealing with Duke Crossed, then they will flee to another country. If the plan succeeds, both of them will survive. Duke Paws will not waste effort hunting them down if he himself is not suspected. On the other hand, if the plan fails, as long as Aisha, the one who lured Duke Crossed, keeps silent, nothing will happen to Dorothy. Dorothy says that a child like Aisha cannot have a private audience with the Duke, but Aisha objects because Duke Crossed cannot judge rationally when it comes to family matters. If Aisha says she has information about his daughter, he will definitely come. As expected, Dorothy does not easily trust Aisha. Aisha tries to convince Dorothy that even if it fails, only Aisha will take responsibility. Dorothy thinks for a moment and is eventually persuaded, as long as no harm comes to her. Aisha is very happy she did it. However, because Dorothy cannot trust Aisha, from now on Aisha will stay with Dorothy. Dorothy warns Aisha not to dream up any other ideas. Because if Dorothy is dealt with, Aisha will not be able to avoid this disaster either. That night, Dorothy is the Duke of Paws's only weakness. If Dorothy's identity is exposed at this time, Duke Crossed, who intends to go to the kingdom of Dokja, will gain the upper hand. With Duke Crossed's superior position, Duke Paws will not be able to make any move easily. But the problem is that Aisha does not know any way to reveal that Dorothy is a spy. The next morning, Dorothy leaves and warns Aisha not to do anything foolish. Aisha is still lying on the bed, resting comfortably. But when the door closes, Aisha immediately opens her eyes. Because she was afraid Dorothy would come back, Aisha quickly prepared. A spy must regularly send reports to their master. Therefore, spies who infiltrate noble families usually write reports on their own clothes using a special chemical infused with the abilities of the Paws family. Therefore, the letters cannot be seen with the naked eye until they are soaked in ice water. Like this, Duke Crossed intends to visit without an escort of knights. With this, Aisha has physical evidence proving that Dorothy is a spy. If Aisha leaves this here, someone will definitely report it to their superiors. And now if Aisha returns before Dorothy comes back to the room. Suddenly at that moment someone calls Aisha, making Aisha startled. Calypso comes over and asks Aisha what she is doing here. Aisha breaks out in a cold sweat. The plan to sneak away after leaving the evidence has been discovered by Calypso. But of all people, she ran into this loyal Meister. Aisha awkwardly explains that she drew a map at night. It is a bit pitiful, but it is a fitting excuse for Aisha. Aisha wonders whether Calypso bought it. Calypso suddenly rushes over. Seeing this, Aisha is startled, her eyes wide open. This immediately makes her recall unpleasant memories from the past. But Calypso has no ill intentions. He simply brings a basket in front of Aisha. Aisha slowly opens her eyes and she also sees that basket. Faced with this situation, Aisha is extremely confused. Seeing Aisha go on the defensive against his actions, Calypso is also confused and speechless. Calypso asks Aisha if she wants a sandwich. A moment later, the two of them go outside and sit in the manor grounds. Aisha guesses that because she looks like a child, he doesn't seem to be very suspicious of her. She thanks Calypso for his help last time. Back then, she was completely not in her right mind. Calypso comments that her clothes are quite loose for a child. Calypso asks why Aisha is washing clothes that are clearly too big for her. Earlier, she was chased by a servant. Could it be that Aisha is being bullied? Aisha stammers and explains that it was because she called Dorothy ma'am, so Dorothy got angry. Aisha only helped wash the clothes because she wanted to make up with Dorothy. Previously, Aisha was afraid she would get into trouble if a stranger touched the laundry equipment, so she lied without thinking. In reality, in her heart, Aisha was hoping and praying that he would let this go. Calypso says that others will speak badly of the Crossed family if they see this, so he asks Aisha not to do it again. Aisha agrees with Calip's words, and in her heart she wonders whether he is really worried about Aisha. The more she meets him, the more she finds him warmer, even though he looks cold on the outside. Aisha asks him if he brought the sandwich here just for her, at the orphanage. Even finding a piece of bread is very difficult. Calip guesses that they don't feed Aisha properly there, although it's not to the point of starving to death. This is the first time she has eaten something this delicious. Calip tells the girl that there is still plenty more food here, so she can eat as much as she wants. Aisha eats while thanking him. It has been a long time since Aisha has felt kindness like this. She feels as if she is being tickled. Aisha recalls when they first met that day. He sincerely believed Aisha's innocent words and protected Aisha. Moreover, even if he is just a gardener, he still belongs to Crost. Aisha still does not know that the person in front of her is Duke Crost, and secretly thinks that if he becomes her ally, she will be protected by the duchy. Seeing Aisha with a piece of bread stuck on her mouth, Calip points to his own mouth to remind her. Aisha immediately clumsily wipes it off. Calip hands her a handkerchief and tells her to use it. Perhaps that is what Aisha truly needs, not just someone strong, but a warm man like this. If he becomes Aisha's guardian, then even if life is a bit boring, Aisha feels that she can find true happiness. Of course, that is a story to be told after Dorothy's situation is resolved. Aisha looks at the handkerchief that Calip gave and softly calls out to him. Aisha asks him if he has ever thought that it would be nice to have a child. As soon as Aisha finishes speaking, the atmosphere suddenly changes. Calip says that he does not need any other children. Hearing him say that, Aisha can only stammer, Calip says that they should head back. Aisha thinks that means he already has a child. She doesn't know because last time he didn't answer either. She does not know what happened, but somehow he seems sad. That is a pity. Aisha feels that she would be safer if someone like him were her guardian. Aisha tries to reassure herself. She cannot afford to be weak. She needs to focus on finding a way to survive. At that moment, Dorothy bursts into the room and shouts. Dorothy asks where Aisha has been until now. Aisha says that she was just having a snack with the gardener. Dorothy asks if the gardener did anything foolish. Aisha explains that she was just trying to act friendly to gather information. Dorothy demands that Aisha explain the next plan. A short while later, Aisha goes to meet Calip. He has received word that Aisha requested a private meeting. The plan Aisha told Dorothy earlier was that she would tell Duke Crost she had additional information about his daughter and request a private meeting. He is desperately searching for information about his missing family, so luring him in will not be difficult. Calip does not know how confidential this information is, that it requires him to come all the way here. But the matter must be important enough to warrant a private meeting. Aisha says that the young lady told her the same thing. In the confined space with only Aisha, Dorothy, and Duke Crost, Dorothy will be the one to strike at Duke Crost. That is the plan. After that, they will take advantage of the chaos to escape and hide in another kingdom. Aisha has already said all of that, but Dorothy will not succeed in the assassination. At that very moment, Dorothy rushes toward Calip with a weapon in hand. With his abilities, Calip immediately notices it. What no one expected is that Aisha rushes in front of him to take a fatal blow. Aisha takes the blow just like that. Calip is shocked and shouts her name loudly. Dorothy does not expect this situation at all. She collapses to the ground. Calip immediately shouts, "Assassin!" Thanks to her diligent training, Aisha managed to avoid some vital areas. Even so, the blow is still very painful. The knights quickly arrive and subdue Dorothy. Dorothy keeps screaming. Despite the pain, Aisha still smiles. Her plan has succeeded. 5 years ago, a horde of monsters from the north, known as the Apocalypse, invaded this continent. The continent completely fell into the hands of the powerful monster army, and before long, it was devastated. Driven onto the defensive by the monster's onslaught, a hero appeared, none other than Duke Calip Crost of the Kingdom of Ice. He defeated the monsters using his special ice ability, and when he finally succeeded in building a defensive wall, the continent's morale soared, gradually turning the tide of the war in their favor. Thus, the war against the monsters ended in a victory for humanity. The hero, Duke Crost, pillar of the kingdom of ice, the great wall and the impenetrable shield, was praised as such. He returned in triumph, earning the emperor's trust, the envy of the nobility, and the cheers of the people all at once. But what greeted the return of the hero? It was news of the disappearance of his beloved family. Having lost his family, Duke Crost searched for them like a madman, but could not find a single clue. And gradually he realized that he was being consumed by madness. What was he fighting for? He only wanted to protect a place where he could live safely with his family. When the 5-year life-and-death war ended, he lost everything he had. Calypso is not in the mood to meet anyone. A hero, a shield, all of that holds no meaning for him. He became someone who cannot show his face without wearing a mask. He has grown tired of everything. He waits for news about his family, not even knowing whether they are alive or dead, hiding his expression behind a mask, pretending that he is still fine, and supporting his family as its head. He wants to abandon everything right now. He has tried to endure everything as much as possible. But on that day, he met Aisha. Aisha ran into his cloak and hid inside it. And in the present, Aisha is still lying unconscious on the bed. Calypso knows that Aisha is a spy. After many generations of conflict with the Potes family, Calypso knows all about them. Calypso knows the names of their poisons, their combinations, their spies, everything, including their methods of communication. From the very beginning, Calypso had no choice but to be suspicious. And in the laundry room, he already knew it, that this child was a spy sent by Pose. But Calypso could not understand why she had gone so far. Thinking back on his conversations with the child and the terms of their agreement, Aisha desired survival more than anyone else. Could this also be a ploy by Pose? Calypso wonders whether Aisha truly wants to betray Pose and seek protection under Crost. Thanks to Aisha, he obtained solid evidence, exposed the spy, and Calypso was able to visit the Poze Duchy together with his knights. Calypso decides to keep observing Aisha for a while longer. Not long after, Aisha also wakes up. Before she can fully regain her senses, Calypso asks why she did something so reckless. If she had missed even slightly, her internal organs would have been destroyed. Hearing Calypso say that, Aisha realizes that her plan has succeeded. Now Aisha only needs to answer the questions well. She says that it is because he is the hero of the continent, and the one who promised to protect her. Calypso immediately interrupts Aisha and exposes her identity as a spy. Hearing him say that, Aisha is startled and panics. The person who attempted to assassinate Calypso is Dorothy. Calypso realizes that neither of them trusts the other. Dorothy is also gathering evidence to prove that Aisha is a spy. Aisha realizes that the times Dorothy leaves her work are the moments when she is gathering evidence that Aisha is a spy. Aisha blames herself for always lacking foresight like this. If Dorothy is discovered to be a spy and is arrested, she will definitely reveal Aisha's identity. That is why Aisha risked her life and had no other choice but to plan to help the Duke take the attack. Aisha thinks that if she shows a child risking her life to protect him, he will dismiss Dorothy's accusation as nonsense. But Dorothy is also gathering evidence that Aisha is a spy. Everything seems to be over for Aisha. Aisha asks if she will also be dealt with. As she says this, Aisha's body trembles uncontrollably with fear. Seeing that, Calypso gently pats Aisha's head. Calypso lets out a soft sigh. Then he reassures her, telling Aisha to calm down. Calypso takes out a sheet of paper and tells Aisha to read it. Aisha takes the paper in her hands, still not knowing what it is. When Aisha realizes what the paper is, she is shocked and asks why. Calypso says that the contract is still in effect, and that he is the only one who knows Aisha is a spy. So Aisha doesn't need to be afraid or trembling anymore. If Calypso's daughter is truly where Aisha said she is, he will allow Aisha to be adopted into the family of a Viscount, so Aisha does not need to worry. Aisha is confused as to why the contract is still valid, even though Calypso already knows she is a spy. Calypso says that it was Aisha who was stabbed instead of him. Moreover, when they go to the Poze Duchy, Calypso will be able to bring his knights with him. In other words, Aisha has saved him twice. Since Calypso owes Aisha his life, Calypso thinks he should give Aisha a chance. Hearing those words, Aisha lets out a relieved breath and tears begin to stream down her face. She says that Calypso is her savior. Calypso smiles and tells Aisha not to talk nonsense anymore and rest. The next day, after stopping the assassination of Duke Crost, Aisha became a small hero who saved Duke Crost. With the attentive care of the maids, Aisha wonders whether being so pampered at her age is really appropriate. Of course, she also has to find the Duke's daughter so that this life can continue. Duke Crost receives an official apology from the Duke of Poze regarding Dorothy, and for that reason he no longer trusts the Duke of Poze. He heads to the kingdom of Doktia with 50 knights. Before leaving, the Duke allows Aisha to stay in his castle until a suitable guardian is chosen. But Aisha also has her own pride. She needs to quickly find a way to survive on her own. A maid says she needs to hang out the laundry, and Aisha immediately offers to help. At that moment, Aisha suddenly realizes something. Aisha walks to the window and looks down at the estate below. She wonders aloud why the gardener didn't come to work today. The maid doesn't know who Aisha is referring to, but says the gardener likely took a short leave while the Duke is away from the castle. Back then, when Aisha was bedridden all day, the gardener came to visit her. At that time, Calypso brought a basket of food and asked Aisha how she was feeling. When Aisha saw him, she ran over to him with great joy. The gardener spoke to Aisha. Duke Crost had specially allowed the gardener to take care of Aisha until her wounds healed. Thanks to that, Aisha was able to dispel the boredom of lying in bed all day. At that time, Aisha said that Duke Crost wasn't as scary as she had imagined. Rather, she thought she might have misunderstood him. As Calypso gently wipes the food off Aisha's face, he asks whether that is true, and in what way she misunderstood him. Aisha says that although she made a serious mistake, the Duke still trusted her and forgave her. Calypso asks what exactly Aisha did wrong. Aisha says it's a secret between her and the Duke. She cannot tell anyone, even if it is the gardener. In this way, the gardener gradually became someone special to Aisha. He was also the first adult who helped her, and the only one who treated her kindly after she recovered from her illness. But right after Duke Crost left the castle, the gardener also disappeared. Aisha thinks he wasn't upset just because she didn't tell him the secret, but still, it would have been better if he had at least said he was taking a short leave. When she arrives there, Aisha sees a young boy acting spoiled with his mother. Seeing them so happy makes Aisha feel a bit sad, and she wonders whether the gardener might be working at the Crost family estate with his daughter. Come to think of it, the gardener uncle also has a child. Aisha wondered if he goes on vacation with his child. Thinking that, Aisha also felt sad and jealous. She wished she also had a family like that. At that moment, the maid came over and urged Aisha to quickly get ready. Aisha tried to push those thoughts aside, because today was an important day. Today was the day Aisha was introduced to the Frisia Viscount's family. Viscount Frisia greeted Aisha, saying that the Duke had introduced her as a very smart child, and the Viscount's wife smiled and told Aisha not to feel too pressured, just relax and be herself. Aisha also politely greeted the two of them. She introduced herself, and at that moment she looked like a little princess. Even the Viscount and his wife were surprised by Aisha's etiquette. If it was refined courtesy, Aisha had been thoroughly trained in it during her spy training course. Aisha said that she had been looking forward to the day she would meet the Viscount and his wife, so she studied hard on her own. Viscount Frisia said that he admired Aisha at such a young age, and the Viscount's wife asked Aisha how old she was. Aisha said she was 5 years old. Viscount Frisia asked Aisha if she had ever heard of the Frisia Viscount family before. From here on, it was an interview for Aisha. Aisha had memorized information about the Viscount's estate over the past period to prepare for this, and with this, Aisha was sure she would score points. Aisha said that the Frisia family was recognized for its farming abilities, that they were the first family in the Ice Kingdom to be granted a noble title despite coming from commoner origins, and that there were even plans to personally grant them a territory. The territory was called Frendia, a fertile agricultural region surrounded by a river, and the main crop was wheat. It may still be a bit early, but if Aisha were adopted into the Frisia Viscount family, she would like to study agricultural techniques. If both of them agreed, Aisha also wanted to do farming herself to gain experience. Of course, Aisha would also be very happy to marry for the glory of the Frisia Viscount family. This statement made the Viscount and his wife startled. Aisha wants to become the golden wheat of Frisia. Aisha took a sip of tea while thinking that this was the quality of a well-prepared adopted daughter. Aisha observed the expressions of the Viscount and his wife for a moment. Aisha realized that their expressions suddenly changed. The Viscount's wife thanked Aisha for researching their family so thoroughly, and Viscount Frisia understood why the Duke had praised Aisha so highly. Aisha wondered what she had done wrong, and she needed to find a way to win over the Viscount and his wife. Aisha heard that Lady Frisia liked poetry, so she wrote a poem. Suddenly, at that moment, a maid ran over and said that a telegram had been sent from the Duke. The Viscount's wife immediately asked whether they had found the Duke's daughter yet. They said that the Duke's daughter could not be found. They said they had searched not only the orphanage in the Pots Duchy, but also all nearby facilities, but still could not find her, and the servants were informed that they were now returning after temporarily withdrawing. The Viscount grew worried and said he wanted to go meet the Duke, and the Viscount's wife also told Aisha to get ready. At that moment, in the Pots Duchy near the Andra swamp, Calypse held a small torn piece in her hand and asked, "Is that all?" The knight confirmed it and said there was nothing else. Although it was called the Paws Duchy, this place had never been touched by human hands. But as Aisha had said, the young lady was here, and the chances that she was still alive by now were extremely low. Calypse hadn't even managed to call her name properly, and now she didn't know what she should remember her by. After that, Calypse ordered everyone to retreat. At that moment, his reason for living had completely disappeared. More precisely, he no longer felt worthy of living. Calypse wanted to end it immediately, to end all of this, because that was the only way he could atone. The story has gone off course. The original clearly states that at the orphanage in the Duchy of Potsy, the Duchess's daughter's body had already been found. So, in terms of chronological order, it would make sense that the young Duchess was still alive at the orphanage. Aisha wondered if the story had changed because of her interference. There was only one reason Duke Crossed was hiding the fact that Aisha was a spy. The contract was still in effect because Aisha had told him the whereabouts of the young Duchess, but the young Duchess was not there. Aisha was someone who should not exist in the Crossed household. A clear target to eliminate, this time no matter what. Aisha ran to a place with no one around. She needed to survive. Since deciding to infiltrate the Crossed family, Aisha had memorized the layout of the inside of the castle beforehand. The end of this ventilation duct leads to the garden. Because this isn't a path people usually use, no one will find Aisha here. She wondered if she would have to spend the rest of her life running away just to survive. To wander from place to place again. In this life, Aisha wanted to live differently from her previous life. In her previous life, she had lived a life without happiness. She wondered why things like this always happened to her, and not to anyone else. In her previous life, her parents died early, and even after she finally managed to escape that hell and become independent, there were still bills and rent payment reminders, all suffocating her. That's why, at least in this new life, Aisha wanted to live normally like everyone else. Even though she had ultimately reincarnated as a minor character who dies quickly, she thought she could change her fate because she knew the original story well. But fate cannot be changed. Aisha still couldn't escape this miserable cycle. Even if she had been reincarnated into another world, she was still herself. So there was one good thing about transmigrating to this world. In this life, she could finally rest without pain. At this moment, Calypse had also returned. The butler came over and said that the Viscount and the Viscount's wife had come to visit. Calypse left, saying that he was very tired and would come greet them later. At this moment, a knight came again to report that the child had disappeared. The knight reported that the child who had claimed to know the whereabouts of the young Duchess had disappeared. The servants said that Aisha disappeared right after hearing that the young Duchess was not there, and they could not find her anywhere in the estate. Instead, they found a bottle of medicine in the storage room. Calypse saw the bottle of medicine and he seemed to recognize it. A suicide drug from the Pose family. Calypse wondered why this was here. He recalled the times Aisha had said that the Duke was her guardian. Aisha's words kept echoing in his ears. Aisha had said that the Duke trusted her and had forgiven her. The Viscount of Frisia's wife suggested gathering everyone and finding Aisha immediately, because Aisha might be in danger. Realizing this was true, Calypso immediately left. There was no time left. Calypso was in a great hurry. Calypso had to find her before the poison spread throughout her body. Calypso called out as he went, hoping to get a response from Aisha. Maybe she hadn't left the castle after drinking the poison. Even though she had infiltrated as a spy, she still longed to live every moment fully and to entrust herself to Calypso, her enemy. She had been so desperate to live that she gave Calypso that information with absolute confidence, and if she drank the poison after hearing that the young Duchess was not there, then there was no way she intended to deceive Calypso with false information. Now she knew that her information was wrong. She must have been terrified. So if, like Calypso earlier, she lost her will to live, and in the end she drank that poison. Calypso denied it. He didn't want that to happen. That child seemed mature, but in reality was so foolish that her mouth was full of breadcrumbs, and he hoped that maybe Aisha had just accidentally dropped and spilled the medicine. She was the type of person who, even while trembling, would boldly propose a deal to Calypso. And after the successful negotiation, she smiled brightly in relief, as if she had found a way to survive. There was no way a child like that would lie. Aisha was confident enough to bet her own life on it. That little girl was Aisha. Was she so frightened that she had to choose to take that medicine? Calypso covered his face and apologized to Aisha. He hoped that Aisha was still safe. Suddenly he heard a voice. Calypso looked over and saw a small hole nearby. Calypso immediately shouted, asking if Aisha was there. Aisha's eyes welled up with tears as she said she had done many bad things and thought she was about to die. Aisha was very frightened. She just wanted to live, even though there were many reasons why he shouldn't be allowed to live. To protect this child, Calypso had found a reason to live. Calypso held out his hand and told Aisha to take it, because it was very dangerous there. But Aisha was worried that if he saved her, he would also be caught. Even in this situation, Aisha was still worried about him, and he wondered what had pushed her to such a desperate state. Calypso reassured her, saying she had done nothing wrong. The responsibility lay with the adults who caused it, not Aisha, and Calypso knew that feeling this way was selfish. But even so, he wanted a chance to make things right. Aisha's hand slowly lost its strength. Calypso shouted in panic, telling her to hold his hand tightly. Calypso tried to pull her out and held her tightly in his arms. Looking at Aisha in his arms, he was at a loss for words. The memories from that time came flooding back once again. Calypso thought that Aisha was wrong. The one who was saved was not Aisha. Calypso gave a faint smile. The one who was truly saved was him. Time passed quickly, and now at the manor. For the first time in a long while, Aisha had a beautiful dream. A dream in which her parents were still alive and they were singing a lullaby to Aisha. It was so warm she wished that moment would last forever. But at that moment, the dream suddenly changed. There was no longer the warmth from before, but instead anger. Aisha suddenly woke up from the nightmare. When she opened her eyes, she realized it was just a dream. Aisha looked around and wondered where she was. This room looked like a noble's bedroom. At that moment, someone came over and asked if she had woken up. Calypso said that she had been sweating quite a lot while sleeping. Aisha was surprised by how handsome he was. It was lunchtime and Calypso told her to sit down. At this point, Aisha finally remembered that he had found her while she was hiding in the drain, but she didn't understand why the gardener still hadn't reported her. Aisha was certain that she was a serious criminal. When Aisha tried to ask something, Calypso interrupted her by feeding her. After finishing the meal, Calypso handed her a glass of water, and she was finally able to speak. Aisha asked when she would be arrested, and Calypso denied it, saying that would never happen, because Calypso had torn up the contract. Aisha immediately asked if they were going to run away together, but Calypso instead handed her a piece of paper. It was the adoption application she had wanted. Calypso gently told Aisha to become his daughter. Aisha could read, so she was able to check it herself. Aisha was worried. Would it really be okay for her to become Calypso's daughter? Calypso had no intention of speaking dishonest, insincere words to a child. Aisha was afraid that he might become the one hunting her down, but in the end, she had finally found an adult who truly cared about her. Aisha didn't want to lose him. Calypso wondered why she was hesitating. Aisha was deeply grateful that he had protected her, but she didn't want him to become a fugitive because of her. Calypso tried to reassure her, saying that if she was worried about the registration, she could sign it without thinking any further. He knew Aisha wasn't an ordinary child, but he was fully capable of handling this. After saying that, Calypso picked up the bell and rang it. Immediately, a servant appeared in the room. The head maid couldn't believe that Calypso had removed his mask in front of everyone. It had been a long time since then, and Aisha now felt confused. She didn't understand what was going on. Aisha looked up at Calypso. Then she looked around this luxurious room, and the vassals bowing their heads. Calypso said that he would formally introduce Aisha. Starting today, she is Aisha Crossed, the young lady of House Crossed. At that moment, Aisha suddenly realized that he was the Duke of Crossed. Calypso ordered everyone to treat her properly and with respect. He asked if there was any problem. Calypso asked that just a moment ago, Aisha had been begging him to adopt her. So had her heart really changed now, and Aisha could only stammer without knowing how to answer. Aisha only realized that after learning his true identity, but looking back, there were many suspicious things. Even though he was a gardener, he allowed a spy who could pose a threat to the duchy to receive free medical care, and no one stopped his actions. Seeing that Aisha still wasn't answering, Calypso called out to her in confusion. If only Aisha had thought it through a little more carefully, she could have realized it sooner. Aisha had tried very hard to escape the original story, but in the end, she became the adopted daughter of the Duke of Crossed, just like in the original version. If there was one difference from the usual situation, it was that the Duke of Crossed stood right in front of Aisha. He was not a villain in the novel. But in the novel, this character was someone who loved Aisha more than anyone else. The Duke's castle, which had been shrouded in silence for 5 years. His life was completely turned upside down after adopting Aisha. Some of the servants who had worked here for 3 years were seeing the Duke's face for the first time. With such a handsome face, they wondered why he had hidden it behind a mask. They also wondered that Aisha was a liar who claimed to know the whereabouts of the young lady. Why did Calypso adopt her? At that moment, both of them were extremely happy. The servants observing from above still hadn't stopped gossiping. At that moment, Mai came over. She said that whatever it was, the Duke had ordered them to treat Aisha with the same respect as the young lady, so they needed to obey the order. Mai told them to return to work. Only Nox was quietly lost in thought. After that, Nox went to the Duke's room. Nox noticed that Aisha wasn't here and asked how she was doing. Calypso said that aside from being a little tired, she wasn't injured or sick anywhere else. Calypso asked, "Why do you want?" Nox asked Calypso if he didn't have anything he wanted to tell him first. Everyone would think Calypso was her real father. Aisha was not the first orphan to try to enter the duchy either. Of course, Aisha was very smart and followed Calypso's instructions very well. But the truth was that a child of unknown origin claiming to know the whereabouts of the young lady was extremely suspicious. And most importantly, the young lady was not there. Nox couldn't understand why Calypso trusted that child so much, but it might all have been a lie from the very beginning. She was also a spy from the Pote's house. Calypso immediately reminded Nox of his words. But Nox still didn't stop. He had to say what needed to be said. Between the spy from the Potsy family they had captured this time, and the suspicious movements from the kingdom of Doctia recently, Nox had warned Calypso many times. They were the ones who always coveted Calypso's power, and without the Crossed family protecting the continent from monsters. The kingdom of Doctia, which had long dreamed of unifying the continent for generations, had led its army in invasions long ago. Calypso asked if Nox was doubting his judgment. Nox said it would be better for the Duke to send her to an orphanage funded by the duchy like before, or let her be adopted by nobles who wanted a child. Calypso immediately refused, saying that Aisha was his daughter and that he had already signed the adoption papers. Nox reminded Calypso to think about the countless children who had come to deceive him after his family disappeared. Among them, there had even been an infant. Nox believed that Calypso was not someone whose judgment was influenced by sympathy, but Nox didn't understand why. Why does it have to be that child? Calypso said that he wanted to save that child. Beyond that option, he had no other choice. He had given everything he had to protect his family's home. But now he had nothing left, no family, only a worthless medal. He had tried to hide it, but he was still human and he was completely exhausted. To Calypso, that child was a savior. Calypso understood Nox's concerns, but he hoped Nox could trust him a little. Nox understood that too, and he let out a long sigh. However, Nox asked Calypso to promise him one thing. If Aisha deceived Calypso, and if that child became a threat to the Crossed family, then Calypso must abandon her immediately. Aisha's report successfully infiltrated the Crossed household. Aisha walked quietly down the hallway, her small steps light against the floor. Aisha suddenly stopped, realizing it was Nox. Aisha spotted Sir Nox ahead. Knowing he was a great help to the Duke, she thought she should get on his good side too. Aisha greeted Sir Nox brightly, wishing him a good afternoon. Sir Nox answered after a brief pause, returning her greeting. Nox let out a quiet sigh as he passed by, leaving Aisha standing there in awkward silence. Aisha watched him go with a fallen expression, realizing he must have seen her only as a child. Aisha stood alone in the hallway, used to being disliked, but it still stung when it truly happened. Aisha knocked on the door, telling herself she had the Duke supporting her, so she needed to try a little harder. Aisha pushed the door open with a bright smile, calling out to Mr. as she stepped inside. Calypso looked up from his desk in surprise, recognizing Aisha at once. Calypso drew Aisha into his arms and asked why she had come when he had told her to wait in her room. Buried against Calypso, Aisha admitted she had felt a little lonely being by herself. Calypso looked down at the little treat in surprise, wondering if it was a snack. Aisha nodded and told Calypso it was a telegram snack from House Pose. Aisha explained that the mice were trained to eat snacks shaped like letters and turn them into the household code hidden in their droppings, and once the message was checked, the snack could be crushed to leave no evidence. Duke Pose and his spies maintained contact through meticulous methods. First, a spy wrote the report along the hem of their clothes. Then the garment was delivered to a base disguised as a repair shop. Conversely, when Duke Pose sent a telegram, his messages could travel from the heart of the royal palace to the corridors of noble castles, restrooms, and orphanages. Even the frigid north was within reach. His telegrams could pass anywhere through unnoticed routes. Mice were the ones used to carry those telegrams. Aisha thought Duke Pose had likely survived all this time because of methods that airtight. Aisha said she thought the message ended there. The telegram confirmed the mission to secure the adoption and urged her to focus on the upcoming succession trials. Aisha hesitated as she checked the rest of the message. Then her eyes widened, the final order calling for Dorothy's disposal. Aisha understood at once. Disposal was the end reserved for a spy who failed. Standing before Calypso, she realized she had briefly forgotten that cruel reality because she had been living under the Duke's protection. Even if Dorothy was not a good person, Aisha thought the proof that Dorothy had once existed in this world might be remembered by no one but her. Calypso stared at the telegram in alarm and asked Aisha if it had been sent to her from House Pose. Even if Aisha's identity was already obvious, the mention of a successor made her realize Calypso could not help reacting sharply. House Crossed, the family bound for generations to subdue magical beasts, had been required to raise a successor, and since it was also the house of the Duke who lost his entire family, it had been an important point in the original story too. Aisha blamed herself at once. The real lady's hope had only just been crushed, and she had carelessly brought up the matter of a successor. Calypso looked down at her and thought bitterly that no one should say such things to a 5-year-old child. Calypso thought the man was even more insane than he had expected, then called for Mai. Mai answered at once, and Calypso told her to watch over Aisha for a moment and bring Nox to him. Mai accepted the order immediately. Aisha glanced back at Calypso beside Mai and thought he looked truly angry. As she left the room, Aisha could not help wondering whether Calypso would be all right. When Calypso got angry on her behalf, the feeling settled in Aisha like a sweet bite of dessert. Sitting before the cake with a quiet flush on her face, Aisha thought she should not feel this happy, yet she could not deny it. Aisha quickly steadied her heart, telling herself she could not keep leaning on him like this. She wanted to become someone the Duke could rely on too. Mai said she would take her leave, while Aisha thought that if she wanted to become someone the Duke could rely on, she had to start here. Aisha nervously called out to Miss Mai, thinking she needed to preserve the real Aisha's image and keep speaking to her warmly. Aisha said it was too much for her to eat alone and asked if Mai would share some with her, if she did not mind. Mai said she was fine, and Aisha quickly brightened again, remembering the snacks the Duke had given her. Mai told Lady Aisha she did not need to force herself to get along with them. Aisha faltered at once, trying to say that was not what she meant at all. Mai said there was not a single servant in the mansion who could be friendly with someone who had broken her promise to find the young lady. Aisha fell silent at last, the weight of those words sinking in. Aisha lowered her gaze for a moment, but she still held on to her resolve. Aisha smiled brightly and said they would definitely eat together next time, Miss Mai. Mai paused in surprise, caught off guard by Aisha's words. Then Mai turned away and told Aisha to get some rest. Meanwhile, in Duke Calips's office, Calips held his head and told Knox he had never once doubted his abilities until now. Calips said he was truly disappointed by how things had turned out. Knox reported that the maid who had attempted the assassination had died in the dungeon. Calips reminded Knox that he had ordered strict surveillance, then demanded to know how the maid had died before the interrogation could even begin. Knox explained that they had sent the interrogator to the dungeon that day and assigned a knight to monitor the situation just in case. The knight reported that by the time the interrogator arrived, the maid had already drawn her last breath. In the maid's case, there were signs of a struggle, but the interrogator seemed to have been attacked as well. Knox said the interrogator appeared to have taken his own life. Calips then said the succession trials must be drawing near, and Knox confirmed it. Calips said the atmosphere inside House Crossed had been unsettled lately, then ordered Knox to tighten security more than ever and keep a close watch on Aisha. Knox repeated her name in surprise and Calips confirmed it. At the upcoming succession trials, Calips intended to officially introduce her. Aisha sat quietly with her dessert, unaware that Calips had already made that decision. Calips sat in the office with Knox, while Aisha quietly ate beside him. Calips called Aisha's name and told her he was going to introduce her at the upcoming heir trial. Aisha froze in surprise, the fork still raised in her hand. Aisha looked at him in shock and asked if he meant her, and Calips calmly said she was officially part of Crossed now. Aisha hesitated with the fork in her hand, then softly called him uncle. Aisha quietly pointed out that she did not have the power of ice. To become the heir of House Crossed, one had to prove their qualifications through 3 trials, and because the family protected people from monsters, an ice ability was overwhelmingly advantageous. With the Duke's entire family gone, there was no suitable blood heir left, and although ice ability gave a major advantage in the trials, there was still a chance for an adopted child to take part. Calips told Aisha he wanted to officially announce that she had become his daughter. Calips said the succession trial was a family event, the perfect day to introduce Aisha properly, and once that happened, no one in the mansion would dare treat her carelessly again. Aisha wondered if Calips knew she was being quietly ostracized in the mansion, then forced a small smile and thought she was still managing fine. Just having Calips on her side already felt like enough, and Aisha quietly thanked him, calling him uncle. Calips picked up Aisha and said that from tomorrow he will leave the castle to conquer monsters. So if there is anything she doesn't know, she should ask Knox. Aisha looked at Calips's clothes and thought she understood why he was wearing this outfit. And that also means that she has to stay alone in the castle for a long time. Calips spoke loudly on purpose. He said if Knox causes you any trouble, then feel free to hit him on the head. The girl thought to herself, would that be acceptable when Knox was the Calips' powerful arm? After that, Calips asked Knox to follow him because there will be a meeting soon before departing. Knox asks if Calips will bring Aisha with him this time, and he hopes the answer is no. But contrary to Knox's wishes, Calips's answer was just this once. The next day, Calips set out to the north to conquer monsters, and Knox actually followed Aisha 24/7. Knox asked Mai, is that kind of waddle like a duck normal for a 5-year-old child, right? Or is it something special that only Aisha can do? Mai said that at that age, everyone is the same. Knox says, recent research has revealed that the reason the creatures look especially cute when young is not for anything else, but to protect themselves from predators. Because they cannot feed themselves and need protection, they try to please others by acting cute. At first, little girl Aisha thought that Nox was a very rigid person. But he is a rather strange person, far different from Aisha's imagination. A maid suddenly rushed to call Nox. She said that Marquis Lilith suddenly came to visit. She continued, the Marquis came here to see Duke Calypso, but she didn't know what to do. Marquis Lilith is a marquis of a branch of the Crost family. Unlike Crost, who is closer to knights than to the nobility, he is described as the embodiment of a luxurious aristocrat who has just emerged from the heart of the upper class. There was only one reason why he came to visit while Duke Calypso was absent. Nox asked, the regular meeting is still a week away. Why did he come here at this hour and then told the maid to tell him to come back next time? Perhaps he is trying to gain a portion of the Crost family's assets when there are no more heirs. Nox told him that Calypso had set out to conquer the monster. He seemed surprised and said that he had a very good idea. Aisha was brought into her room by the maid before being trapped in the fight. Suddenly, Tex came running at a hurried speed and shouted loudly, "Hey, get out of the way!" Because he was running too fast, Tex hit Aisha. Nox quickly ran over and asked what was going on. Nox asked Aisha if she was okay and if she felt pain anywhere. Tex suddenly spoke up. Tex asked Aisha why she was blocking his way. Aisha looked at Tex, while he sneered that she was strutting around the ducal house as if the Duke were her own uncle, calling her an arrogant little brat. Aisha thought that if she argued with Tex now, she would only look ridiculous too, and in moments like this it was better to endure it. Aisha lowered her head with a bright smile and said she had not been watching where she was going. Nox looked at her in silence, caught off guard for a moment. Tex coldly asked if sorry was all she had to say after getting his clothes dirty. Then Tex started to press further, saying that if she was truly sorry. Tex ordered Aisha to kneel, and Aisha stared at him in shock. Nox suddenly dropped to one knee and Tex asked what he was doing, while Tex said that if she was truly sorry she should offer a proper apology. Nox called Tex's name sharply and told him Aisha was the direct princess of House Crost. Tex faltered in disbelief, unable to understand why someone as insignificant as her would hold that status. Aisha looked up at him in surprise, realizing this boy was Tex. In the original story, Tex was known as the next heir to the Duke of Crost and the heir of House Lilith. Tex sneered and asked if she was the adopted child he had only heard rumors about. Then Tex dismissed her outright, saying it did not matter because she could never become the heir anyway. Tex scoffed that House Crost had no need for an heir who could not wield ice ability. Aisha lifted her head at last, her eyes turning sharp as she faced him and began to speak. Aisha looked straight at Tex and said he did not seem like heir material either. Tex stared at Aisha in disbelief, repeating her words, and Aisha shot back that a petty child like him did not suit the position of heir either. Tex's face hardened at once, and he raised his hand, saying he would have to show her. Nox shouted for Lord Tex to stop, but Tex unleashed his power anyway. In an instant, Nox moved to shield Aisha, blocking the surge of ice rushing toward them. Nox kept Aisha behind him and told Tex to look while quickly asking if she was all right. Tex smirked through the ice and asked if he still looked small to her now. Aisha said Duke Crost was respected not simply because he possessed the power of ice. Aisha looked straight at Tex and said it was because he used that power to protect people. Aisha said that someone who used that power only to threaten others lacked both the qualification and the capacity to become heir. Tex flared up in anger, unable to believe she still dared to talk back to him. Nox shouted for Tex to stop. Standing in front of Aisha, Nox warned that even if Tex came from the Marquis Lilith family, he would not allow him to harm the young lady any further. Nox turned and fixed Lilith with a cold stare, his warning leaving no room for retreat. Lilith forced a strained smile, but Nox made it clear he would not be able to escape responsibility for this. Aisha thought Duke Crost truly had an exceptionally loyal servant. Lilith seethed that if Nox kept acting like this, then once Lilith became successor and head of the house, he would have to retrain all the vassals in proper etiquette from the beginning. Nox smiled coldly and said he would take those words to heart. Lilith spat out his anger under his breath, calling Nox an arrogant wretch. Nox ordered the maid to escort Lady Aisha back to her room, and the maid obeyed at once, while Aisha quietly called out to Sir Knox. Aisha noticed something fall from Knox as he walked away, and she stood there in confusion. Aisha looked down in surprise, noticing it was a pen. As the maid stood behind her, Aisha crouched to pick it up, realizing it had just fallen from Marquis Lilith's pocket. Aisha read the engraved name on the pen and quietly froze. It said Luce. A little while after returning to her room, Aisha sat alone on the bed, still lost in thought. Holding the pen, Aisha tried to recall the story as clearly as she could. Duke Crost's family had been made up of 5 people, his 2 sons and his wife, who had been pregnant with a daughter, and everyone except the Duke had vanished. It was said that the second son, Lucas, had ended up at a circus. Lucas had been kidnapped by a slave trader, and because he possessed special abilities, he was sold to the circus troupe for a high price. And the name of that slave trader was Luce. A marquis aiming for the position of successor, and a slave trader who had coincidentally kidnapped a child of the ducal house, the connection felt far too suspicious to ignore. Aisha became certain of it. Either Marquis Lilith and Luce were working together, or Marquis Lilith himself was Luce. Her original plan had been to gather clues about the lost children one by one and report them to the Duke, but now she had to reconsider. The young lady's whereabouts had turned out differently from the original story, and in the end, the Duke had failed to find his daughter. That was why Aisha could not act rashly. If what she knew was wrong again, she would not only be cast out this time. If she made the wrong move, Aisha knew she would end up hurting Calypso for a second time. But lying on the bed in silence, Aisha still could not let the thought go. Calypso noticed Aisha's shoes had already become small on her growing feet, and when she insisted she could still wear them, he paid no mind. Then Calypso asked what color she liked, and when Aisha shyly answered yellow, he chose her new things with that in mind. Calypso said the shoes suited Aisha perfectly, and from now on she should stop worrying about what others thought and speak at ease. Holding the yellow shoes in her hands, Aisha thought that if Calypso could be this kind even to a child who did not share his blood, then his longing for his lost children must run unbearably deep. Aisha tightened her hand around the pen and quietly steadied herself. As much as Calypso had helped her, Aisha resolved that she would not hesitate any more, and would do her best for him. Knox clenched a fist in frustration, cursing under their breath. To enter the ducal castle without permission, Knox stood in silence, as the thought weighed heavily in the air. Knox thought that if the young master had been here, something like this would never have happened today. Still, Knox lowered his gaze, unable to let the matter rest. Unexpectedly, Lady Aisha had handled the situation well. Even if only for a brief moment, Knox thought she had shown true dignity. Knox wondered if His Excellency had seen this side of Aisha too, and that was why he had chosen to adopt her, if that child truly became a strength to him. Then perhaps, Knox thought, he might be able to ease at least a little of the lingering attachment he still held for the young masters. Knox suddenly sensed something and sharply demanded to know who was there. Then he looked down and found only a rat, his suspicion faltering for a moment. Knox frowned at the rat in disbelief, wondering why it was in a place like this, then noticed the strange footprints beside it. His eyes narrowed at once, a chilling thought crossing his mind as he realized it could not be. Knox rushed off at once, recalling the Duke had recently said that Poe's spies used rats to communicate. Rats were common elsewhere, but in the freezing grounds of Crossed Castle, they were a rare sight, and Knox knew at once this was no coincidence. For a rat to appear in the mansion only a few days after the spy's assassination was far too suspicious, and Knox threw the door open at once. Inside the room, Aisha turned back in surprise, caught in the middle of what she was doing. Knox realized at once that there had to be another spy still left inside the mansion. A bitter look crossed Knox's face, knowing he had been a fool for ever trying to believe otherwise. Startled by his sudden entrance, Aisha looked up at Knox and asked what had brought Sir Knox here. Knox slowly stepped closer to Aisha, his gaze fixed firmly on her. Knox seized Aisha's hand and lifted it high, his grip leaving no room for escape. Knox fixed Aisha with a blade-sharp stare and demanded to know what she was writing. The girl said that there was an urgent message from Calypso. Knox asked again wonderingly, and Aisha asked him to check immediately. The scene shifts to the north, where the Calyps are out conquering monsters. Calyps calls for the knight to open a gate. The accompanying knight says that preparations for the battle with monsters have just begun. Calyps says he needs to go back immediately. Aisha lowered her gaze under Nox's shadow, unease rising in her chest as she called his name in her mind. Sir Nox. Aisha thought Nox must be truly angry. A few hours earlier, the hem of a dress fluttered in the wind. With Mr. away, Aisha knew there was little she could do right now, and since there was no guarantee Lucas was truly at the circus, rushing in blindly would only make things worse. If that was the case, Aisha realized she had no choice but to use Sir Nox. Since Sir Nox was keeping a close eye on her, Aisha knew he would notice at once if she showed even the slightest sign of being a spy, but he also had to know the details surrounding Dorothy's assassination. That made Nox the only one on site who could handle anything that happened in Mr.'s absence and act in his place. It had to be Sir Nox after all, and as he coldly repeated that he had asked what she was writing, he pointed out that she had written on her clothes instead of on paper. Aisha tried to brush it off in panic, but Nox yanked the fabric up at once, forcing the truth into the open. Nox stared at the writing on the fabric, his expression hardening as he realized what it was. The message ordered someone to contact the employee storage room of the auxiliary circus on the third day of Duke Crost's subjugation mission, and Nox recognized it at once as a method similar to the spy letters sent to Duke Posey. Aisha gave a small start, then thought she had guessed right. Nox said today happened to be the third day of the Duke's monster subjugation mission, so they would go to the circus together, fake princess. Since Aisha had dragged Sir Nox into it, things would be ideal if Lucas was really there, but even if he was not, nothing tied to the spies should actually happen, so they ought to be able to smooth it over as nothing more than a child's prank. And so Aisha managed to trick Sir Nox and make him accompany her, but Aisha sat stiffly across from Nox and thought he was far too scary. Nox let out a slow breath, his cold eyes fixed ahead in silence. Since leaving the estate, Nox had not said a single word, and Aisha knew she had lied and used Sir Nox's feelings, so all she could do was endure the silence. Before long the carriage reached the circus. Aisha stepped into the circus with Nox behind her, certain this was the place. She pulled back the curtain, knowing the place described in the original novel was where the second son of House Crost had been. Aisha and Nox froze at the sudden roar rising from inside the tent. Before them, the crowd erupted under crimson light, all of it centered on a hilly circus. On the surface it looked no different from an ordinary circus, but that was only a front. From illegal monster shows to kidnapping, confinement, and human trafficking, they secretly dealt in every crime that brought in money. A masked host stepped forward and welcomed the audience, calling it the greatest circus on earth they had all been waiting for. As the opening spectacle was announced and the crowd surged around them, Nox turned in frustration and demanded to know what on earth Aisha had been planning by coming to a place like this. Hidden among the moving bodies, Aisha thought this was her chance to slip away from Sir Nox. Aisha slipped through the crowd, and when Nox noticed she was gone, she had already made up her mind. She had first planned to find Lucas together with Sir Nox, but he had frightened her far more than she expected. Nox called out for Aisha in alarm, while Aisha thought that if they kept moving together, her actions would only be restricted. Aisha decided it would be better to look for Lucas quickly on her own. Right now rescuing Lucas came before everything else. If Lucas was really here with a special ability, they would have classified him as an S-rank product. And because he was a special product, Aisha thought they would have hidden him somewhere ordinary people could never reach. If that was the case, Aisha hurried forward without hesitation. Then she suddenly bumped into something, rubbing her face as she winced and wondered what it was. The hooded men looked down at Aisha and said this was no place for a little child to wander into, then demanded to know how she had gotten there. Facing them, Aisha realized she had no choice now but to present herself as a product if she wanted to go any farther. Aisha looked up at the hooded men and timidly asked if they worked there. Aisha said she had been watching the show when people suddenly rushed in and she got lost. Now her mother and father must be looking for her. Aisha softly called for her mother and father, and the two hooded men exchanged uneasy looks. One of them then told Aisha he would take her to the employees' break room, so she should wait there while he brought her parents. Since he said he would find them, Aisha described her parents as people dressed in very expensive and elegant clothes, adding that her family ran a huge business and was very rich. With her own appearance matching the look of a ducal household, Aisha knew she was practically bait rolling right into their hands. Aisha knew her value as a product was more than enough to tempt them with money, and though it meant taking risks, she had no other choice with time running out. At last one of the hooded men agreed to look for her parents and told her to wait there, and Aisha realized he had taken the bait. The two hooded men led Aisha deeper inside, and as she followed them, she quietly kept watch over every turn. Then Aisha looked around and innocently asked if they would still be on site even after the event ended today. One of the hooded men said they were supposed to check on that product after the monster show, leaving Aisha wondering what exactly they meant. The other clicked his tongue in irritation and muttered that it was a nuisance. As Aisha walked on, she heard them mention Duke Potse and her eyes sharpened at once. At that moment, the scattered pieces in Aisha's mind finally began to fit together. The crossed princess found in the Potse duchy, the pen, Marquis Lilith, Mai, and even Lucas, all of those threads pointed toward the same place. And at the center of everything stood Duke Potse. Aisha felt a chill run through her. If Duke Potse was involved too, then one careless move could ruin every plan she had. Then a voice called out to the child, and Aisha turned in startled silence. A voice told Aisha it needed to sleep for a while from here on, and before she could react, her body suddenly gave way. Aisha's eyes grew heavy at once, and she slipped into unconsciousness. Aisha had braced herself for this, but the blow still hurt more than she wanted to admit. With tears trembling in her eyes, Aisha realized all of this was for Duke Potse. They existed for Duke Paz, every breath and every step bound to his will. Those children, raised for Duke Posey from birth, would carry out their mission to the very end, no matter what. Even if it cost their lives, they would swear loyalty to Duke Paz and offer him everything. Curled up on the ground, Aisha wondered in the end if she had never truly managed to escape even a single step from Potse. Aisha stirred weakly and lifted her eyes, finding a man standing over her through the blur. Her vision trembled, and in a faint voice Aisha called out to Mr. Lucas looked at Aisha and quietly asked if she was awake. Aisha stared at him in confusion, struggling to ask who he was. Then she caught those blue eyes and pitch-black hair, and her breath stopped at once. Above all, that face was the very image of Duke Crossed in his childhood, and Aisha knew at once this child was Lucas. Seeing Lucas in front of her, Aisha thought things had gone far more smoothly than she expected. Lucas looked at her small face in confusion, and asked how she had ended up there too, when she looked so young. Afraid of sounding too familiar, Aisha only smiled and said she had lost her parents. Lucas told her she had better hope they were rich, because money was the only way out of this place, and Aisha quietly asked how long he had been here. Lucas said he had been there for 5 years. That matched perfectly with the time Crost's second son vanished, and Aisha became certain once again that this boy was Lucas. Aisha rushed to Lucas and said she would take off those restraints so they could get out together. Lucas looked at her in disbelief and asked how she could possibly unlock them, telling her not to bother because she would only waste her strength, and Aisha insisted she had a way so he should not worry. Lucas told Aisha those were not ordinary restraints. They had been specially made to suppress abilities, and Aisha realized it was exactly as she had thought. It was created by Paz, but no matter how special these limitations are, unlocking stuff like this is child's play for me. Dorothy says they are specially designed to control the Crossed family. They are limited inhibiting abilities. Don't forget that if Lucas doesn't unlock them in a few seconds, he will die. Dorothy started the timer. The girl quickly pulled out a needle from a lock of hair, then quickly gave it to Lucas to unlock it. Aisha says it is unlocked. The little girl said that now let's leave together. Suddenly Lucas asked Aisha if the Duke sent her or not. Aisha asked in understanding what Lucas meant. If not, then how did Aisha unlock it? Aisha thought to herself, Lucas also knew Pause was involved in his kidnapping. Lucas stared straight at Aisha and asked how she knew his name. his voice turning cold as he said they had first sent adults to torment him, and now they had sent a clumsy little child. It was ridiculous. Aisha blurted out in shock that she was not a spy, but Lucas coldly accused her of being one sent by Duke Pozzi. Even as fear tightened around her, Aisha could not honestly say with complete confidence that he was wrong. No matter how much grace Aisha had received from the Duke, she knew that would never be enough to erase her past. As long as she had once been born a spy, Aisha realized she might never truly be able to escape it. To Lucas, it seemed everyone around Aisha already knew what she truly was. But Aisha thought that was not true. There was still one person who had always... No matter what anyone said, Calypso had told Aisha she was his daughter, and he had believed in her. Aisha lowered her eyes and quietly corrected herself. Yes, as Lucas said, she had been a spy, but that was who she used to be. Aisha quietly told Lucas she had never wanted to become a spy. Lucas said he had been abandoned by his birth parents and raised as a spy by the Pose duchy that took him in, but that life had been so painful he had struggled desperately just to survive it somehow. Aisha told Lucas that after living through that pain, she had been saved by the grace of the Cross Duchy. Aisha said she had once overheard talk about him in the Pozzi duchy, and if he had really been taken by Duke Pozzi when he was young, then she believed he would want to escape from him just as she had. Aisha said that finding Lucas would be her way of repaying Duke Crossed, so she would definitely take him back to his father. Then she reached out and urged him to run away with her. Lucas looked at her hand in silence and answered softly, asking if she truly meant that. Aisha saw the answer in Lucas's eyes before he finished. He did not anymore. The next instant, Lucas unleashed a surge of ice that roared between them, and Aisha recoiled in shock. Lucas said he trusted no one but himself. Then Lucas coldly said that father she mentioned had not looked for him in 5 years, and Aisha called out to him in shock, trying to stop him. With a burst of ice, Lucas shattered the way open before him. Lucas told Aisha to find her own way out, then ran without looking back, and Aisha shouted after him to unfreeze this before he left. Finding Lucas had been a good thing, but now that he had mistaken her for one of Pozzi's people, Aisha knew everything would be ruined if he ran into Sir Knox like this. Then Aisha looked around at the shattered wall and the ice still twisting around her, realizing this aftermath was a disaster of its own. Aisha ran after Lucas, realizing he was softer than she had first thought. The restraint he froze had weak ice power to begin with, and when the falling debris struck it, Aisha was able to slip free more easily than expected. Aisha steadied herself and thought that a direct descendant truly was a direct descendant after all. Even though she had chased after Lucas right away, he had already left a complete mess behind him. The ice ability Aisha had seen from text before was impressive, but compared to Lucas, it was nothing at all. Aisha hurried to find Lucas before he ran into Sir Knox, then a sudden meow made her stop and turn. Aisha stopped in shock when she found a cat hiding beneath the broken stone. Lucas clicked his tongue and thought it was absurd that something this trivial had managed to catch him off guard until now. More than anything, Lucas could not understand why Aisha's foolish words about taking him back to his father and running away together had made him care. But if what Aisha said was true, Lucas could not ignore it, and ice surged around him as his wavering heart began to shift. If Aisha had really been forced into becoming a spy against her will, then Lucas realized she must have spent every day in fear and despair over her situation. Just like him, curled up through the past 5 years, breaking down over and over while waiting for a father he believed would one day come save him. But that child was different. Unlike Lucas, who had already given up, Aisha had kept struggling until the very end. Lucas glanced back and thought it might not hurt to talk to her a little more. Then he spotted Aisha still there instead of running away, and irritation flickered through him as he wondered what that idiot was doing now. Lucas stopped in disbelief when he realized Aisha was fussing over a cat even in the middle of all this danger. Watching her crouch there with the small animal in her arms, Lucas could only wonder what kind of person she really was. Lucas called out to her as Dandelion Head. Aisha looked up in surprise and asked why Lucas had come back, and Lucas shot back that he should be the one asking why she still had not run away. Aisha held up the kitten and awkwardly said there was a little cat here. Lucas snapped that a cat was not the problem right now, while behind him a hooded man appeared. Aisha's face paled as she noticed it first, calling out for Lucas to wait. Then Aisha shouted that someone was behind him, and Lucas spun around just as the attack came down. The hooded man lunged at Lucas with killing intent, calling him a monster. Aisha's scream tore out at once as she cried for to stop it. A while later, Knox appeared before them and coldly repeated the price they had named, 5,000 gold. At the meeting point, Knox said he had heard they were looking for a blonde-haired child, and when they claimed they were keeping her safe, he coldly asked whether 5,000 gold was not a cheap exchange. Seeing the blue writing on the cloth, Knox realized the people at the meeting point were the very ones who knew the code, and he had mistaken them for allies. Knox looked at them with a faint smile and asked if this was some tired kidnapping routine, then said a demand like that was hardly unreasonable. Before anyone could answer, a man came running in panic, shouting that this was bad. Hearing that the control device for the S-grade product had been released, and it was now rampaging, Knox's expression hardened at once. Knox snapped toward the source of the disturbance, instantly realizing where the chaos was coming from. Knox felt it at once. This was the energy of a special ability. And if such a power existed in the Frozen Kingdom, then it could only be the crossed ducal family's ice ability. A terrible thought struck Knox. Could the missing young masters truly be here? Then Knox stepped into the room broken open by ice, and the silence before him turned heavy at once. Knox said they had to send a telegram to His Excellency immediately. Before he could move, the hooded men closed in around Knox. A hooded man stopped Knox cold and said that was far enough. Surrounded on all sides, Knox heard them tell him not to choose the difficult path when there was an easier lord to serve, and to settle this quietly before it grew louder. A hooded man struck without hesitation, telling Knox not to resent it too much. As the blow landed, they told him this was all something he had brought upon himself, and Knox cursed under his breath. The hooded men were thrown into confusion at the sudden attack, shouting for everyone to regroup at once. Then someone saw the crest and froze, realizing with dread that it could only mean House Crossed. Duke Crossed appeared before them at last, his cold presence alone enough to freeze the air. Knox called out to His Excellency at once, and Calypso asked only one thing: where Aisha was. Knox steadied himself and said she was probably somewhere beyond that door. Knox began to say that if the telegram was true and Aisha was a spy, Calypso cut him off at once and said he would make that judgment himself. Knox lowered his gaze and answered in a tight voice, yes. Without another word, Calypso raised his hand and shattered the door with a burst of ice. Calypso stepped through the broken doorway, his gaze landing at once on Aisha in Lucas's arms. The moment Calypso saw Aisha, his eyes widened in shock. Calypso looked from Lucas to the sleeping child in his arms, unable to make sense of the scene before him. Then his gaze fixed on Aisha, and Calypso called her name in stunned disbelief. By now, Aisha should have been tired from playing and getting ready to sleep. So why is she lying there like that? Calypso tremblingly raised her hand and called Aisha's name. Lucas saw Knox and Calypso and was extremely wary. When he saw Calypso intending to approach, Lucas immediately used his ice ability to stop him. Lucas shouted loudly, telling Calypso not to come any closer. He gritted his teeth angrily, asking if Calypso was Duke Crossed. Knox spoke up, no way. Lucas immediately knelt down and said in frustration that 5 years had passed, not a day had passed without him waiting for Calypso to come to his rescue. But unfortunately, Calypso was just busy conquering monsters, as if what happened to Calypso's bloodline didn't matter. Calypso wanted to say something, but Lucas shouted loudly, telling him to be quiet. Lucas said that he doesn't want to hear excuses and doesn't want to accept any apologies. Don't know when. Lucas's tears fell like a waterfall. He gritted his teeth and begged Calypso to save Aisha. Because at least Calypso can do that. Lucas earnestly begged Calypso to save Aisha as quickly as possible. Suddenly it was dark outside the Crossed family mansion. A maid asked Mai. She said that since yesterday Lady Aisha has no longer appeared, so should she prepare separate food for Aisha? Mai hesitated and thought, since Knox suddenly took that child away from here, something must have happened. Mai wonders if Aisha will come back. Despite the lies, Duke Calypso accepted Aisha, But for Mai, it's still quite difficult. Because it's not only the Duke who loves children, from the time they are babies, Mai is the one who directly gives them milk and nurtures them like a true mother. All the servants love the children as if they were their own children. But that happiness didn't last long. When the Duke went to fight, a disaster struck. The madam and the children were all missing. How can an entire family disappear overnight? How can they disappear without leaving a trace? Mai was extremely sad and disappointed. It was a big shock to her, and after that, the Duke's family searched for masters to find them for many years, but the results were zero. No one could find any trace of them. Taking advantage of that desperation, a cunning child took over that position. And as if it were natural, that child took away the happiness that should belong to real children. At least Mai thought so, but Aisha is only 5 years old. Is Mai being too harsh on her? After thinking for a while, Mai told the maid to prepare it as usual. Aisha loves strawberries, so let's prepare strawberries for dessert. Suddenly someone rushed over and called Mai's name. A maid ran up and shouted loudly, saying, "Duke." Mai was extremely shocked to hear that Duke Calyps had returned with the young Duke, who disappeared 5 years ago. But Lady Aisha, who returned with them, was seriously injured. After returning, Calyps immediately invited a doctor to check on Aisha's health condition. And then the doctor announced the extremely shocking news: Lady Aisha had passed away. After hearing that Aisha had died, shock fell over everyone, and even Lucas could only stare in disbelief. Lucas shouted that it was nonsense. Lucas said he had definitely been talking to Aisha right before they arrived at the ducal castle. Lucas said it made no sense, he had just seen Aisha, so saying she was dead could not be true. The doctor said the young lady had only hidden the truth because she did not want to make the young master worry. The doctor said Aisha must have understood her own failing condition better than anyone, even while smiling and telling Lucas she was fine. Then the doctor bowed his head and apologized to the young master. Lucas said that was a lie. Looking at Aisha lying still on the bed, Lucas said this was not right. Lucas ordered Aisha to open her eyes right now. During the 5 years his children were missing, Calyps had imagined their reunion over and over again. He had imagined where they might be and how they were living. He had imagined how overwhelming it would feel when they finally met again. In all the countless reunions Calyps had imagined, never once had it looked like this. As someone tried to calm him, Lucas cried out that they should let go of him because he could not leave Aisha behind. Even after being given a second chance to be a father, Calyps could not bring himself to move. Nox stood beside the broken Lucas, while the silence in the room sank even deeper. Nox called out to His Excellency in alarm. Then Calyps's ice burst violently through the room, freezing the air around everyone as his grief finally broke loose. Calyps stood there like a man beyond redemption, his voice hollow with despair. Looking at Aisha lying motionless on the bed, Calyps ordered everyone to get out. A few days later, pale light and quiet flowers filled the room in heavy silence. The maids whispered that the room was still being kept open, and as one wondered how long it could go on when that child was already gone, the other hushed her and said Lady Aisha had saved Lord Lucas, so His Excellency treasured her as if she were his own flesh and blood. Elsewhere in the estate, someone let out a quiet breath and thought the ducal household somehow felt even bleaker now than it had 5 years ago. An official dispatch from the imperial palace arrived, asking when the suspended monster subjugation would resume, and when Nox answered, Calyps cut through it all with only one question. Calyps asked whether Nox had found any way to save Aisha. Nox knew. His Excellency understood better than anyone that saving Aisha was impossible, and if he kept clinging to it, it was most likely out of guilt. Even though Aisha had been adopted as a direct-line young lady, she had never truly been acknowledged by the servants. The servants grumbled in secret that they were already exhausted and even had to handle that liar's laundry, while others quickly warned them to lower their voices before someone heard. And even Nox, His Excellency's closest aide, had once doubted his intentions, denied that child, and looked at her with suspicion. Nox thought Aisha had probably pushed herself too far and caused this tragedy because she was burdened by the guilt of failing to find the true young lady and the sorrow of never being acknowledged, and he could not stop thinking that if only he had trusted Aisha a little more, Knox said he would keep investigating a little longer, though there had still been no progress. Knox then screamed in surprise as Calypso suddenly had a bloody nose. Knox said Calypso had not slept a wink since that day, and now that there was finally a change, he urged His Excellency to calm down first, while he called for a physician. Clutching the blanket with bloodshot eyes, Calypso cursed under his breath, barely holding himself together. Blood stained the sheets as Calypso said that, past or present, being a hero meant nothing if he could not even protect one person he loved. Standing alone in the cold light, Calypso admitted he was truly pathetic. Lucas slipped away quietly with a bundle of yellow flowers in his arms. A maid noticed him at last and called out, asking where the young master was going. The maid realized Lucas was heading to that room once again. Holding the yellow flowers close, Lucas stood before the frozen doorway in silence. Lucas stepped quietly into the room, carrying the flowers to Aisha's bedside. Lucas carefully placed the yellow flowers down, his hands gentler than ever. Lucas looked down at the flowers in silence, his eyes quietly trembling. Then Lucas bit his lip and lowered his gaze, unable to hide the grief pressing down on him. Lucas stood by Aisha's bedside and softly asked when she was ever going to wake up, because everyone said she was dead, yet he still could not believe them. Lucas said the Duke, Knox, and he were searching everywhere for a way to cure her, no matter what it took, so Aisha only had to wait a little longer. Looking at Aisha lying there in silence, Lucas admitted there was still so much he did not know about her, and so many things he still wanted to know. Lucas wiped at his eyes and quietly promised that he would come again tomorrow. Lucas placed his hand over Aisha's and asked that when he returned, she would please wake up and talk to him. Outside the silent room, a white cat sat beneath the night sky, its violet eyes gleaming in the cold moonlight. The cat suddenly transformed into a boy in a burst of pale light. The silver-haired boy sat beside Aisha and quietly asked if she had truly died in the end. Then he rose from the bedside and said death was only death. Having lived for a very long time, the silver-haired boy had seen so much death that he had grown sick of it. Whether it was frightened animals meeting their end inside iron cages or raging monsters dying at human hands, death had long since become something he loathed. No matter what kind of life perished, to him it had always been the same. Every death looked no different from the ones that had come before. That had certainly always been the case for him. Then he remembered the moment he had first met Aisha, when she found him hiding alone beneath the broken stone. That was the moment Aisha lifted the heavy stone and saved him. Aisha looked at him with worried eyes and asked if he was all right, and despite being a small, fragile human, she had protected him. She was only a little child who had collapsed trying to protect someone far stronger than herself. At first he had thought her kindness was foolish. But the moment he saw Aisha's tearful face, that thought began to break apart. It felt as though Aisha was silently telling him not to give up, to keep living no matter what. And because of that look in her eyes, he had wanted to ask who she really was. The silver-haired boy hated leaving things unresolved, so in the end he decided he would wait. Resting a hand gently over Aisha's forehead, he quietly told her that she would have to tell him herself. The silver-haired boy smiled faintly and said he would see Aisha later. Then a voice remarked that he had brought back something quite interesting from his trip to the Duke's estate. In the dream, there was no background, and the speaker had no face, only Aisha surrounded by shadows in a dark place, with a chilling smile full of teeth staring at her. And the other thing Aisha remembered was a hand slowly reaching toward her forehead. In that dream, Aisha thanked the silver-haired boy, realizing he was the one who had helped her. Then Aisha looked up at him and softly asked who he really was. The silver-haired boy only smiled and said Aisha would find out soon enough, then bid her goodbye. Aisha's eyes trembled open, and the first thought rising through her haze was that they should ask the royal family for help. When Aisha slowly opened her eyes and woke up, but Calypso still didn't know anything, he was still talking to the doctor to find a way to save Aisha. Suddenly Aisha called out, "Mister?" Calypso was startled and turned back towards Aisha's bed. Calypso was extremely shocked to see when Aisha had sat up. Lucas was also surprised. The boy quickly ran towards Aisha. The doctor also quickly came to check on Aisha's condition, only Calypso was still so surprised that he froze. Aisha asked Lucas if he was injured anywhere, or if he was in pain anywhere. The doctor was extremely confused when he was the one who confirmed that Aisha's heart had stopped beating, but now she has woken up. How could this happen? This is truly a miracle. Calypso asked the doctor if Aisha really had nothing wrong. The doctor said that her bruises were still there, but her health was unusually good. In all my years of working as a doctor, I have never encountered a strange case like this. Aisha thought to herself. Everyone said her heart stopped beating, so did she die and come back to life? She thought she had a strange dream while sleeping. Was it related to Aisha in the original story? The person before she entered this body? At least this never happened when Aisha first took office. And the boy in Aisha's dream. Aisha has many questions and concerns about that boy. Aisha wanted to tell that boy that she was now fine and healthier than before. Suddenly Calypso spoke up. Never. Don't ever do such a foolish thing again. Aisha looked at Calypso and thought he had gotten thinner since the last time she saw him, including Lucas and Sir Knox. The girl blamed herself and said that it was she who made everyone worry. Then she replied to Calypso, "Okay, mister?" The girl smiled brightly, saying that she would not let Calypso worry again. A moment later, only Lucas and Aisha were left in the room. Aisha remembered what the doctor said earlier. He said that it looked normal on the outside, but in case the worst happened, Aisha needed to rest for a week. And while Calypso was busy handling the remaining work, Lucas automatically asked to take care of Aisha. But Lucas seemed to want to say something, but was still hesitant to say it. Seeing that the atmosphere seemed tense, Aisha spoke first. She asked Lucas who brought the bouquet of flowers. Lucas said that it was the boy who brought it. What happened? Aisha said that she was just wondering why it was a small dandelion instead of a full-bloom flower. Lucas hesitantly said, "That's because Aisha's hair is as bouncy as a dandelion." After hearing this, Aisha was extremely surprised. Leaving that aside, Lucas asked Aisha about Duke Calypso adopting her. Aisha thought to herself, so this is what Lucas wanted to ask. The situation at the circus was so chaotic that the two kids didn't have a chance to talk. From Lucas's perspective, it's completely understandable that he'd be sad. During the time he was kidnapped, a little girl of unknown origin was adopted as the Duke's adopted daughter. Furthermore, Lucas thought that Duke Crossed had abandoned the boy. The boy must have thought he was betrayed and was extremely heartbroken. Suddenly, Lucas turned to pinch Aisha's cheek. Lucas shyly asked, "You are my little sister now, so why do you keep calling me Lucas instead of Big Brother?" Lucas admitted that he was very angry when he heard that Aisha was adopted, because it made him think that he had been completely abandoned by Duke Crossed. But the boy didn't want to destroy the happiness that Aisha had found so hard. Lucas hesitantly says it's because Aisha saved the boy's life. Therefore, from now on, Lucas will consider Aisha as a younger sister in the family. Not seeing Aisha's answer, Lucas asked Aisha if she didn't want to be a family with the boy. Aisha stammered and said that's not the case. Aisha thought to herself, even though she was in the form of a 5-year-old child, she was still an adult inside. Calling Lucas brother made her feel a bit awkward. Lucas said that Aisha must be doubting Lucas's credibility, so what he needs to do now is to prove to Aisha that he is a trustworthy brother. Aisha thought to herself, eventually she would have to call Lucas brother if she wanted to live in the same house, but calling him now would be embarrassing. Then Aisha asked Lucas to read her a storybook. Lucas suddenly asked again, "A book?" Aisha asks what's the problem. The doctor suddenly opened the door, walked in and told Lucas that visiting hours were over. Lucas quickly left and promised to come back next time to read that book to Aisha. Aisha suddenly called, "Big brother, Lucas!" Aisha thought to herself, even though he tried to act mature, he was still a child. Lucas hurriedly left Aisha's room following the doctor's order. But because he was too hasty, the boy hit the Calypso. Lucas looked up to see who it was. But as soon as I saw the Calypso, Lucas immediately changed his attitude and looked at Calypso with sharp eyes like a knife. But before Calypso could start a conversation, Lucas turned around and left in a cold tone. Sadness was evident on the Calypso's face. He stood there with a heavy atmosphere, Aisha thought of Uncle and Lucas first, her heart reaching for them through the silence. Aisha thought the misunderstanding between Uncle and Lucas ran deeper than she had expected, and they would need time to untangle it. Aisha noticed Calypso opening the door. Calypso asked how her body was feeling. Aisha replied brightly that she had improved a lot, and thanked Calypso for his concern. Calypso smiled faintly and said that was good, it was a relief. Aisha thought that in the end she was glad Lucas had been found, but she had nearly left another deep wound in Calypso. Aisha forced a small smile, thinking she did not want to disappoint Calypso any further with uncertain information. Calypso softly called Aisha's name. Calypso said there was something he should have told her the moment she woke, but he had been a little late. Then Calypso pulled Aisha into his arms and sincerely thanked her for finding Lucas. Still holding Aisha close, Calypso apologized for putting her in danger once again. Aisha blinked in surprise, then quietly said it was all right. What mattered more was whether things had worked out with brother Lucas. Calypso turned back at her words, caught off guard for a moment. Knox knocked and stepped in with Mai, apologizing to Lady Aisha for the interruption and saying her grace was here as well. Mai asked if she might have a moment to speak with Lady Aisha. Aisha looked at her in surprise and quietly asked if Mai meant her. Then Knox and Mai bowed deeply and sincerely apologized to Lady Aisha. Mai confessed that through her foolish judgment she had caused Aisha deep hurt. Knox admitted that after the false lead about the young lady, he had suspected Aisha might have approached House Crossed with hidden intent from the very beginning. And yet Aisha had not only found Lucas, whom they had searched for so desperately, she had even risked her life to save him. Knox said that even if they had still failed to find the young lady, if he had chosen to trust only Aisha, then perhaps she would not have pushed herself so far as to endanger her own life. Knox said that if the strange report Aisha wrote had only been a fabrication to lure them to the circus where the young master was, then every wound she suffered was entirely his fault. Knox bowed his head and said that while his grace had been out subjugating monsters, he should have been someone Aisha could rely on, and he was truly sorry. Calypso cut in before Knox could continue and asked Mai why she was apologizing too. Mai admitted that when Lady Aisha once invited her to share refreshments, she had refused coldly. Mai confessed that she had told Aisha there was no need to force herself to befriend them, because no servant wanted to grow close to Lady Aisha after the lies she had told. Aisha quickly reached out and stopped Calypso before he could say anything more. Mai said she had regretted it ever since, and perhaps in Lady Aisha she had wrongly taken out the grief of losing the young masters. When Mai heard that Lady Aisha had been gravely injured and her life was in danger, her heart had sunk. Mai said she knew it was far too late now, but she still wanted to ask for forgiveness. Mai said she had wanted to apologize to Aisha no matter what. Mai and Knox bowed deeper, saying they would accept whatever punishment Aisha deemed fit. Aisha then called Sir Knox and Lady Mai, and quietly asked if they did not cherish Duke Crossed more than anyone else. Aisha said it was only natural that people who cared so deeply for Duke Crossed would speak harshly to someone close to him, because they had only acted that way out of worry for the Duke. Knox and Mai could only fall silent at her words. Aisha said that was why she was all right, and in truth she was even glad His Grace had such loyal people by his side. Aisha admitted that it was true. She had been hurt a little, but she still thanked them for apologizing. Knox and Mai looked at her with shaken eyes and softly called Lady Aisha. Then Aisha stopped them and corrected them, telling them not to call her Aisha. Calypso cut in at once and said it was the young lady. Calypso told them he would speak with them about this later and ordered them to leave for now. After they left, Calypso thought he had expected the name Aisha would be welcomed. Calypso admitted that he had only watched, hoping that once Aisha became the young lady of this house, she would earn the acknowledgement of House Crossed through her own merit. He had believed her spirited nature would let her overcome even the hollow respect that came only from his authority. Calypso realized he had trusted that, in time, the people of Crossed would naturally come to recognize Aisha as well. Calypso looked at himself in bitter silence, wondering why he had been such a fool. Then Calypso told Aisha she could tell him whenever something like this happened, and Aisha looked back at him in quiet confusion. Drawing her close, Calypso said she did not need to bear everything alone like a child. Caleb's told Aisha once more that she was his daughter. Aisha smiled brightly and said that from now on she would. Outside, Mai worried whether the young lady would be all right, and Knox said that since they could no longer hear raised voices, he believed she would be. Mai said that was a relief. The young lady was wiser than they had imagined. Knox said she was clearly unlike other children her age, and perhaps that was why it had taken them so long to realize their mistake, which was shameful for adults like them. Then a hesitant voice called out to Lady Mai. Knox turned at the voice and asked what Aisha liked most. Elsewhere, Tex sat frozen before the towering ice, staring up at the aftermath in shaken silence. Tex turned at the voice, and Marcus asked with a faint smile if he was tired already, while Tex could only answer, "Father." Marquis reminded Tex that he had been the one who said he would crush that insolent brat thoroughly in front of everyone at the air selection. Tex faltered and admitted he had said it, but now there was hardly any medicine left. Before he could finish, Marquis grabbed him hard, his face turning cold in an instant. Marcus said that with Cross's direct line gone, this was the only chance for a collateral branch to rise, and he warned Tex never to repeat the disgrace their mother had caused by making a mistake in front of the nobles. The accusing voices around Tex closed in at once, saying his name was not appearing, and asking whether something had gone wrong with his ability. There was a pill that could let someone use ice ability for only a short time, and with that alone swallowing up House Crossed would not have been difficult, but something had gone wrong. That little brat was becoming a nuisance, but even so, Tex was still their only ability user, and with only about a week of medicine left, he would need even more than usual for the air selection. Tex hated the thought of it, but under the cold moonlight he realized he would have to meet that man. After the quarantine period ended, a lot had truly changed around Aisha. Sir Knox and Lady Mai opened their hearts and began approaching Aisha with sincerity. Even their old stiff distance started to soften, and Aisha found herself slowly growing more comfortable around them. Lucas, too, was gradually adjusting to life in the castle. Still, one thing continued to trouble Aisha as she watched Lucas eat with Calypso nearby. Aisha knew that misunderstanding would probably take a long time to clear away. So even while the three of them sat at the same table, an awkward silence still lingered between Uncle and Lucas. Aisha thought Calypso was busy with many things, so for now there was nothing to do but wait, because catching the slave trader who had kidnapped Lucas had to come first. After Lucas was rescued from the circus, House Crossed was thrown into turmoil. It was not only that the missing young master had been sold to a circus, he had also been abused the entire time under the guise of a monster show. When Calypso found out, he was furious and tried to track down everyone connected to the circus, but it was as if someone had already stepped in first and erased every trace. Aisha found it strange that Lucas did not expose Duke Posey as the one behind it all. Still, Aisha assumed Lucas had his reasons, so she chose not to bring it up first. With Lucas's testimony, it was reported that they were now pursuing the slave trader. Since the dealer may know the whereabouts of the missing Crossed family members, for the first time in a long time, the Crossed family is filled with hope. Aisha says it's better not to look for them. Calypso was confused and asked what Aisha was saying. Calypso asked Aisha if she felt unwell, and she quickly replied that it was okay. Calypso says that the selection of a successor will take place tomorrow, and he calls out Aisha's name. He said that Aisha will also join as a candidate for this successor position. Aisha said that wasn't she just an introduction. Calypso said that at that time there was a lot of talk about him adopting Aisha, so he said that. But now Aisha has officially become a member of the Crossed family, and Aisha has been recognized by the family, so she is completely qualified. He turned around and called Lucas. For safety reasons, Calypso has kept news about Lucas a secret until now. But in the process of choosing a successor, Calypso plans to introduce Lucas as a new candidate. Lucas was quite surprised by the Duke's proposal, so he turned to ask again about Calypso wanting Lucas to join. A new talented member has appeared in the Branch family. Since the Crossed family has protected the barrier at the end of the world for many generations without special abilities, it is impossible to pass the selection round. He has no intention of discriminating against the branches of the family. But Marquise Lilith is the one making Calypso feel uncomfortable, so he really wants Aisha and Lucas to join, no matter what happens. Calypso turned to say sorry to Lucas for not telling this to the boy sooner. Lucas really was. Lucas thought in fear. Calypso only thought about taking advantage of him. He continued, "This is an official ceremony to announce Lucas's reinstatement as a member of the House of Representatives." Lucas angrily slammed his hands on the table. The boy angrily stood up and shouted, "The House, always the House. What is so great about the Crossed family that makes Calypso willing to abandon his entire family?" Lucas felt that the boy himself was stupid. As he spoke, he was in tears. The tears were about to fall. For the boy thought, if only for a moment, that Calypso might remember Lucas. Aisha sat and witnessed the argument and was extremely shocked. Lucas bravely expressed all his feelings, then he quickly left, even though Aisha kept calling his name. Calypso was just silent and thoughtful, not saying a word, making the atmosphere in the kitchen even heavier. A moment later, when it was already dark, Aisha quietly walked to a room alone. The little girl walked into the room and asked Lucas if he was there. "Please tell her." Stepping deeper, Aisha saw Lucas sitting in a corner of the room. Aisha told Lucas that she was considering withdrawing from the process of choosing a successor. "Now that I think about it, I think it was too difficult." The girl sat on the bed and continued to explain. Like Calypso said, the successor needs to have a power to create a giant barrier to protect everyone, but unlike Lucas, Aisha doesn't have any power. Lucas fears that if the boy and Aisha don't participate, then Duke Lilith's son will become the successor. Aisha asks if Lucas is talking about Tex. She says that Tex looks quite upset. Lucas says that's all the more reason why Aisha shouldn't back out. But the girl said that, after all, Calypso also said that without special abilities, it would be difficult to pass the selection round. Moreover, someone with abilities like Lucas also refused to participate, so it was useless for Aisha to go there. And Aisha asked, what if she caused the Crossed family to lose? What would happen? Lucas frankly says, why does he care about a family that throws away its members like trash? Duke Posey said that Duke Calypso abandoned him because family was more important. So Calypso abandoned Lucas. As you all know, 5 years ago, Lucas was kidnapped by Duke Pose. When Lucas woke up, his mother and brother were gone. And Lucas was surrounded by strangers who took advantage of the boy, all in the name of researching Lucas's special abilities. Even so, the boy still kept faith until the end, that one day soon Calypso would come to save him. However, until Duke Pose and the slave let go to the circus, Duke Posey, who would go to the circus once a month every time, he would read the newspaper out loud to Lucas and ask Lucas if he had missed any articles about Calypso because Lucas couldn't read. In those articles, Duke Calypso was always covered in blood, only obsessed with subduing monsters. Duke Posey's words kept ringing in Lucas's ears. Duke Calypso will never come to Lucas's rescue. If Posey and Calypso fight, it could escalate into a conflict, so Lucas isn't sure if Calypso will help him or not. Lucas doesn't want to be hurt again when he sees with his own eyes that Calypso will choose the kingdom over Lucas. Then at least Lucas will catch the slave trader and get revenge on him, and the boy will find his mother and siblings again. Everyone calls that slave trader Luce. Lucas mentioned this name in his previous speech, but no one seems to know who he is. Aisha recalls the moment she picked up the pen that fell from the Duke Marquis's pocket. If Aisha's theory is correct, then... Aisha asked Lucas if he remembered what that person looked like. Lucas said he was wearing a mask, so Lucas couldn't be sure. Lucas describes that he has brown hair and golden eyes. He seems greedy, like a rich toad. The scene moves to the Marquis. He is instructing Tex that security is tighter than usual. The knights are on high alert. He told Tex to behave in an excellent manner, because there were many eyes paying attention to the father and son. Suddenly there was the sound of someone saying hello to the Marquis. It turned out to be Aisha. She came out to greet Marquis and said thank you for coming here so far. The little girl looked at Tex with steely eyes like a knife and said, but... It seems that the Tex is shaking and is no longer in good condition. Tex got angry and cursed at Aisha. The boy said that he could easily defeat someone like Aisha and told Aisha to shut up. It was as if he had been told something that had hit him in the heart, the boy thought to himself. Is it because he took too much medicine that his body now feels shaky? Aisha said that because Tex looked unusual, she asked without meaning to. Marky was afraid and secretly thought that Aisha seemed to know something, so she behaved like that. Aisha continued, Tex ate something he shouldn't have, and Marky didn't know what Aisha was planning.